Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Public Works for today, Wednesday, March 11th, 2020.
Good morning, President James, Commissioners Villegas, Garcia, James, Davis, and Closer are present. We do have a quorum. We have public comment and public speaker cards under items 1, 4, and 5 today. May we please begin with Bureau introductions, beginning with the Bureau of Engineering.
Good morning, Udi Jimenez, Bureau of Engineering.
Good morning, Gabe Miranda, Bureau of Sanitation.
Good morning, Shanto Wasapan, Bureau of Street Lighting.
Good morning, Nick Lopez, Bureau of Street Services.
Good morning, Linda McLinchy, Bureau of Contract Administration.
Good morning, Ted Jordan, Public Works General Counsel.
And TJ Knight, Assistant Executive Officer.
All right, thank you. Let's first of all approve the meeting minutes from the meeting of Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. Is there a second to my motion that we approve those meeting minutes by Commissioner Garcia? Any objection? Without objection, we'll approve those meeting minutes. Mr. Sachs, on general public comments, sir.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Arnold Sachs. And the yellow shirt, I wore this actually yesterday, too, at the Board of Supervisors. It's a shout out to the LA Rams for their yellow uniforms, because I wore a yellow shirt once before, and I didn't get the message at that time. It took me a couple of weeks. But I'd have taken the money, too. The question is the insanity in sports and how much money they're paying out to athletes. They were talking yesterday at the Board of Supervisors how they spent $300 million for the election system, or the election program that rolled out, and yet there are players, baseball players, that are getting $300 million for 10 years to play baseball. It's somewhat insane, the numbers that are involved in sports merchandising and everything. It's just over the top when the middle class is just falling apart. And I appreciate the meeting on Monday about knowing the rules. That was well played. Setting precedent. And so about precedent, because I talked about health insurance and the problem that the county has with its carrier for the health department. So I understand the Confederate flag has been eliminated in a lot of places because it's racist. And I understand that Herb Wesson filed charges against somebody for drawing a noose on a common card because it was racist. But I go to the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday, and somebody's holding up a Nazi swastika. So why is that not racist? Who makes the decisions for what's racist and who? Who are the judges that decide this? Never mind the prosecutors. But who are the judges that decide this? I mean, 2 out of 3 are racist, but a Nazi swastika. If they painted that swastika on a building, it would be anti-Semitic and it would be racist. But to go into a meeting
Thank you, Mr. Sachs.
held up is screwy.
Thank you, sir. We'll close general public comment. Agenda item number 3 in Council District 6 is a requested bid rejection improvement program, Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant, Japanese Garden ADA Compliance Project, recommending that the board reject all bids for the project and that the city engineer return to the board to re-advertise the project at a later date. Mr. Kopp on number 3.
Good morning. So per the motion, we received bids for this project. The project is to implement upgrades to the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant to provide full American Disabilities Act compliance, or ADA compliance, at the Japanese Garden for all citizens of LA. And we received a couple bids, lower than expected in terms of turnout. The low bidder was at $953,000 within the city engineer's estimate, but did not meet what is called the mandatory subcontractor minimum requirement on the project. That would logically have us evaluate the second lowest bidder, which was considerably higher, almost a $300,000 difference outside our projected budget for the project. I should mention, relative to those dollar amounts, this is a costly project, but it's an important project. What it does is upgrades the pedestrian access throughout the entire garden. That includes structural retrofitting of existing bridges and replacement of existing bridges, as well as providing a family-style bathroom with ADA access. And in turn, we are doing this project within the limits of an operating wastewater facility. So there are safety precautions involved with doing so, as well as allowing public access during the construction phase. So there's a coordination component that of course, imparts a premium on a project that would otherwise be lower if it were outside those limits. And so the city engineer's estimate we still believe is appropriate. And what we would propose to do is reject these bids and resubmit. A couple things involved therein would be to reduce the mandatory subcontracting minimum to 15%, which through evaluation we think is more appropriate relative to the scope of work for general contractors and participating subcontractors. And we are going to take a different approach with re-advertising the project, should the board approve this, would be to reclassify this project as not a wastewater or industrial type project or process project. This is a landscape architectural project. And so in doing so, when we reclassify this when re-advertising, this should hopefully improve the bidding pool and therefore keep the bids within the city engineer's estimate. This process would require a couple months, for an extended procurement phase, but we would project to be in construction, boots on the ground by this summer.
Thank you, Mr. Kopp. Any questions at all? Mr. Jordan, are you okay with the rejection of all the bids on this?
Yes, I concur with the recommendation.
All right, thank you. Then I'll make a motion that we adopt agenda item number 3. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Commissioner Villegas.
That's okay. It's just a minor question. Thank you. Just a quick question. You said you're going to re-advertise this for like landscaping. So is your pool of candidates that you're going to be going towards, is it different from the folks that you written to originally?
Yes, so in general terms, when we advertise a project on the LA Bavin system, LA Virtual Business Network, we have to classify the project in terms of what kind of bidders should be looking at this, right? In other words, this allows people to focus on a certain readout on the LA Bavin system on projects that they may be a prospective bidder on. And so in this case, reclassifying from a wastewater project to a landscape architectural type project should notify different potential bidders.
Thank you, Commissioner Villegas. Anything further? Then I'll make a motion that we adopt agenda item number 3, seconded by Commissioners Garcia and Villegas. And Commissioner Davis, any objection? Without objection, we'll adopt agenda item number 3. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any issue sending number 3 forthwith? We will send number 3 forthwith. Agenda item number 2. Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant, Equalization and Emergency Power Backup Project with the following project segments. Tillman Advanced Water Purification Facility, Primary Equalization Basin Project, Tillman Backup Water Project, Tillman Avors and Evis Gates Replacement Project, and Tillman Screw Pumps Inlet Gates. Recommending that the board receive and file the report. Mr. Kopp, go ahead on number 2. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So this staff reporting involves the same project I just spoke to. This is a big project, and the segments you're speaking to speak to that. It's complex. We are replacing some critical components at the plant that allow the plant to operate during unplanned maintenance, perhaps emergency scenarios where backup power is not available through the grid. And so we are implementing upgrades such as 17 replacement gates that will allow the plant to safely isolate components of the project for raw wastewater and primary treated wastewater, or in general terms, preliminary treated wastewater, to allow for safe access and maintenance and upgrades as needed. And the project will also include upgrades to the existing backup power infrastructure. We're going to upgrade the diesel generators to provide about 6 megawatts of emergency backup power. And last but not least, a design build component will implement a equalization basin to best prepare us for emergency storage leading up to the Donald C. Tillman project's advanced water purification efforts in following years. So back in October, your board adopted a joint report to pre-qualify prospective bidders for this project, or entities. And we received 5 proposals, statements of qualifications, in which a joint panel between the Bureaus of Engineering and Sanitation reviewed and scored and shortlisted to 3 bidders that will be allowed to bid on the project. And so this receive and file is to that effect. We have selected 3 entities: Kiewit Infrastructure West Corporation, WM Lyle Company with Parsons, and Walsh with Brown and Caldwell.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kopp. Any questions on number 2 regarding our receive and file on this report? Then I'll make a motion that we adopt agenda item number 2, seconded by Commissioner Caloza. Any objection? For that objection, we'll adopt agenda item number 2. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any issue sending number 2 forthwith? We will send number 2 forthwith. Agenda item number 1 in Council District 14 for sanitation and the Office of Community Beautification. Requested contract amendment and budget increase, California Natural Resources Agency Green Infrastructure Grant Program. Recommending that the board first authorize OCB, the Office of Community Beautification, to amend the contract with Los Angeles Conservation Corps to authorize work up to $615,000, increasing the contract ceiling by $615,000 for tree well creation, tree care, and maintenance work upon approval of the grant. And secondly, authorize myself or 2 members of the board, let me rephrase. Secondly, authorize the board president or 2 members of the board to execute the contract amendment after the city attorney has been approved as to contract and form for content. Mr. Sachs on number 1.
Yes, thank you again, Arnold Sachs. So on this item, it's only for 1 council district, so it's $615,000 increase. It doesn't say what the original contract was. But what I looked at this and found it interesting is because it's for 3 things. I guess tree well creation, which means they're digging holes to plant trees, tree care, and maintenance work. The maintenance work and the tree care would be what? Trimming the trees. I understand that LA seems to have a problem getting residential trees trimmed, say that 3 times fast, throughout the neighborhoods. So is this a particularly, the Conservation Corps has a lot of contracts to a lot of council districts, but I also found it interesting that they're so job specific here. I appreciate the previous items on the agenda, but my question about that was they're eliminating 1 bid. They're going to open it up to a different type of bid for architectural services and I got to try and draw these strings together. Landscape and architectural projects. So this is a landscape project. Wouldn't you want to bid on that? Or wouldn't you want to open up the bids to more companies, more importantly? So again, it comes down to, if they're going to be doing tree trimming, then it should say tree trimming and not just tree care. What is tree care? I mean, essentially, it is what? It doesn't really say. Tree care is you put up something so the tree doesn't blow over in the wind, or you tie it down with a stake so it grows straight up. That's tree care. And the maintenance work, again, what is the maintenance work? Maintenance work to me would be trimming the trees, trimming the branches, overhanging branches. And yet we seem to have a problem when the city...
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. Ms. Bartlett? Good morning.
Good morning. So my name is Melinda Bartlett, and I am with LA Sanitation and Environment. So we are here this morning to talk a little bit about this California Natural Resource Agency grant that we applied for. The grant runs from somewhere close to April of this year through June 30th of 2022. So it's a compressed timeline. When the granting agency went out as part of our site visits and checking things, they love the tree planting portion of it. And as of Monday, they called us and said, rather than giving you a total of $715,000, we're going to give you $2.265 million to expand the tree planting in Boyle Heights. What that allows us to do, and the bulk of the money is really to remove the concrete within the area. That is the hardest part to fund, along with 2 years of what we consider critical care and maintenance of these young trees. We also, this base funding is Prop 68, which gives priority and preferential treatment if you use a conservation corps as part of the job training and trying to invest in the local youth. So that is what we had done. This additional money that comes in to us that is now available, we would like to start being able to access and use as soon as possible because of that 2-year window. We don't know if how many trees, that 500, originally the grant request was for 500 trees and 200 cuts, and all 500 trees, again, would be maintained and cared for through 2022, June 30th, 2022. So we are excited to have the additional money. There is a lot more community outreach that we need to do immediately to let folks know that this is coming in. And because it already comes with the young tree care, we give the residents or the business owners an opportunity to opt out. If they don't want the tree, we don't want to put a living organism in front of their residents if they're going to pull it out or don't like it. So we do give them an option to opt out, but otherwise we'd like to go into the Boyle Heights and the areas adjacent and utilize the $2.2 million for something well over 500 trees. So,
Okay, you put a couple of issues on the table.
correct.
Let me summarize for you, and then we'll engage in some discussion, I suspect. So, you've got the $615,000 is what is agendized under
Correct.
number 1. On Monday, 2 days ago, you found out about the availability of $1.5 million more.
Correct.
But that hasn't been agendized.
Correct.
Okay, so that would require an amendment.
Okay.
So my concern, and we'll hear from my colleagues in our general counsel, is approving the larger number, not even on 24 hours notice, but literally walked in this morning. So what the board can do is vote today on the $615,000 because that was properly noticed. I would be okay, but it depends on how my colleagues feel, of course, and our counsel. I would be okay doing one of two things. Agendizing it under the 72 hours, or since we've had the substance of the hearing this morning, I would be willing to put it on a special for Friday, provided that's okay with everybody else, but I haven't inquired with anybody else yet. So let's have that discussion. We'll start with Commissioner Colosa.
Thank you, President James, and thanks for the briefing that you provided on this item. Did they explain why we were getting the additional funds? Because it's a large increase. It's more than double.
It is. So originally this grant, the tree planting portion, was an expansion of a smaller green alley project. It's green infrastructure work. When people from the natural resources, and that original request was for around $3 million. When they came out and did the original site visit, and then went home, and then they called us and said, we're going to downscope the green alley. We just want to move forward with the tree planting portion. So we said, okay, great. So we started looking at the portion in the budget, which was a total of about $715,000, with $100,000 100,000 internal to help manage the program, and then 615,000 that would go to LA Conservation Corps. So then that was our request, and it was only Monday afternoon that we found out that they picked something in between, 2.265 million, and said, do more trees. So that's how we ended up there.
So can you repeat again? So the minimum originally was 500 trees that it would plant, and then now with this more than double budget, how many trees would that get you to?
We're not exactly sure yet, because the expensive part of the tree planting is that removal of concrete. And Boyle Heights has some difficult areas. They have very small parkways, very small sidewalks, so we need to start walking and driving a bigger portion of Boyle Heights and the adjacent communities. We'd already identified 3 schools that need a lot of street trees around the schools. So originally we were looking at some of that. We'd had conversation with some of the staffers in CD14. We just finished doing a big event at Breed on a previous grant, Breed Elementary. So this seemed like where we were headed. Now we have the opportunity to really go out and talk to the community a lot more and look for bigger areas. But essentially 2.265 million is, we can do a lot, but we have to hop on it. So yes, if nothing else, I can start with the 615,000. We would like to move forward as soon as we're notified, April 20th, because we need to get trees in the ground to get the 2 years of watering and early care. And that includes mulching and giving the trees the water they need, mulching around the base of the tree, and keeping them healthy. We don't trim the adult trees. They may get some pruning across the bottom, but once the trees have sort of settled into their place, and after the watering and maintenance is over, they're turned over to our street tree program.
So you mentioned that the grant awards would be announced in April.
Yes.
So it's not guaranteed that we're going to get this money?
What they said was, this is what we have for you, and it is what would be on the announcement, but they didn't want us to go out with like a press release and a big announcement, but they want us to be able to move forward.
So is it common for bureaus to ask the board to act before the money is awarded in this case?
It is on these grants. We usually like to have all the authorities ready to go, and then usually there's a caveat if awarded.
Is that in this board report in front of us?
I think we're so far down that line, we don't have to go there. It's awarded.
But it's not actually officially awarded?
Well, in recommendation 1, it says upon approval of the grant.
I think personally, just from my standpoint, I think I know you have mentioned that this seems like there's a high chance of getting this grant money, but it seems to me that we're maybe approving things out of order. You know, I think I would feel more comfortable if you guys asked for our approval closer when it actually happens in terms of the awards, unless for some other reason this is going to delay your timeline. I know you're looking at a completion date of June 2022, and if you have a 2-year implementation period, you have time between April and June to come back to board for approval, especially since the amount that you're asking for approval for today is more than double than the amount listed here. And I also just have a few questions I'd like to ask for sanitation as it relates to just the specific project, since it is related to trees, and I know Streets LA has some matching funds here, but knowing that they are such a huge part of doing the overall planning and implementation of our tree initiatives in the city with the tree forest officer, I would personally like to actually hold this item.
Okay, you want to hold the item regarding the 615,000 as well?
That's correct.
Okay, Commissioner Davis.
I wanted to just find out, I usually support, and I think that it is our job to access additional funds to help create projects in the city. So to that degree, I support us being able to identify funds. Now, this money came from Bureau of Sanitation, is that correct?
This money is through a grant from California Natural Resources Agency that LA San applied for in
Gotcha.
June of 2019.
And so LA San notified you that they have this funds available that can augment the project that you are working on for the $615, right? $615,000, obviously.
Right. I'm with LA Sanitation.
Oh, you are with them?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So you're offering this funds, obviously, to augment this project. And you mentioned in your presentation the total grant is how much?
$2.265 million.
Okay, and so you identified this from the California Natural Resources Agency, right?
Correct. Originally, we had asked for $3 million to
Okay.
do two parts of this project. We do have a council authority to go for the apply, accept, and negotiate, and that has been approved as well for the $715,000. So today, when we came back, it was strictly for the contract piece that we would amend LA Conservation Corps' contract for $615,000.
And so what was the idea of the Bureau in terms of today? When you came in today, your goal was to do what?
To make sure we don't lose that money, that there's a lot of good work that can happen with that. So my biggest concern has to do with this tree care and maintenance. That doesn't start until the tree is planted. I only have 2 years worth of funding, and if we use a year to do the implementation and whatever we need, those baby trees are only going to be allowed at this time 1 year's worth of funding. I need to get them in the ground as soon as possible.
Sure. And I was really kind of focusing on the process by which we would try to achieve the support of the Board of Public Works. What was the thinking in terms of today about what we needed to do to achieve the support of the Board of Public Works? We came in, we presented an addendum to the original motion, and our goal was to get it passed today, right? Is that correct?
If possible, we came in with what they told me was to call it the supplemental information sheet.
Did we have any contact perhaps with the President's Office of the Board or anyone else prior to presenting the addendum? I'm trying to figure out how we strategize to achieve our goal. What were some of the activities we engaged in from the Bureau of Sanitation?
We contacted Fernando on Monday.
Gotcha.
He was out or didn't get back to us.
Oh, I see.
We went to our granting units and had them reach out to their contacts. TJ was off on Monday. This morning we tried to pre-meet with Commissioner James after we realized what we were going to try to put out as an agenda item.
Yes, and I was in a CENTCOM meeting on homelessness, but while we're going through everyone's calendar, but go ahead.
Okay.
I understand totally. This came out of the blue. It was unexpected. But we will follow whatever process you prefer. And as long as I can move forward soon with some portion of this contract, we can keep working on it.
Okay. So now I have a clearer understanding of your strategy here. And so in terms of the timeline, in terms of when you think it would be reasonable to move forward, how long do you think it would take for you to succeed in getting this passed? In other words, do you believe that we could do this next week? Do you believe we could do this next month? Or when do you think, and from where you sit?
I would say if it was all wrapped up, and I do believe I have to go back to council to accept the additional funds. So I was hoping this would be the trigger that would take me back to committee and council. But if we need a different process, we can try to do whatever. I need it sort of, I think, to be all done by the end of April so that I have authority right now just to enter into a contract with the state for $714,000. I think I need that authority for $2.2 million from council to enter into that bigger contract.
So after you leave us, you need to go to the council, and you'd like to have all this achieved by the end of,
I think April.
by the end of April. Okay, fair enough.
And Ms. Bartlett, before I go to the others, you think in that process, you would need to go to just one committee?
Yeah.
Okay, one committee at council and then full council?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Villegas and then Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. Well, congratulations on that grant, by the way. That's a big deal. Boyle Heights really needs it. What I didn't see on here, though, and you can probably send it to us, just the location of where the trees are expected to be planted. That would be helpful.
So we can sort of give you the ideas where we're headed, but without that community input, I can't give you one for one.
Got it.
So I have Amy Schulenberg here. Come on up. What are the names of the schools that we've identified that you've already marked?
Lorena and Sunshine, both. We started there as a... Good morning, I'm Amy Schulenberg with Sanitation. We started looking at schools as a first best option to the community that would be able to bring the greening to as many people as possible right away, and then we would start implementing community outreach to really work with the residents to have meaningful input on where these trees are going to be going.
Sure.
Until we find out that we can do the grant, then we would start actually looking block by block where we would go.
Okay, that's helpful. To the extent it's possible, are you coordinating with Rachel Malridge? Yeah, okay, that would be really
Yes.
good, yeah. Just because it's such a mixed-use community, it'd be good just to have, additional trees in the areas where we have mixed zoning. That would just be my only recommendation. I'm prepared to vote on the item that's on the agenda, and just for, the autonomy for the rest of the commissioners, just to go back and talk to them just about the actual grant that you're going to be receiving. It's a big deal, I know, when you have additional resources, and I would hate to leave that at the table, from the California Natural Resources Agency to be able to grant us these additional dollars, but just for educational purposes for the other commissioners, just to be able to know that. If they've already hinted to you that they're going to be awarding, that's just somebody who's done grants in the past. That is a big deal. You will get that award. It's just a matter of time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Villegas. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, President James. I too want to say congratulations, because I know that it's a big undertaking, especially this grants unit. You guys come time and time again with good news for us and good deeds out into the community. So I fully support, and I'm very happy that the additional money is coming. And I too, like Commissioner Villegas said, we as a grant writer and a grant believer, I know that when they call you and tell you, it's almost pretty sure that we're gonna actually get that. But and I think today's conversation is just because we received this morning, and it's substantial. It's not like we're approving 10,000 more or 20. It's almost like $1 million or 2 million going on. I didn't do the math. So. And I also want to recommend that if you guys can just check in with the Chief Forester, Rachel, just so that the plans kind of go out that way. And whatever we decide as a board today, I'm moving forward. I just want to see if you can just show, maybe you could do a briefing. I just want to see kind of us with the added amount, your new plan, whether it's going to be concrete or it's just kind of like a skeleton. I just want to see what you guys are thinking now of doing with the additional funds. And so I'm very happy that this is coming to fruition, and I know the community really does need it. So thank you for that. Thank you for all your efforts. To you and to all your team too. I think she's back there. So thank you, you too. So good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia and Ms. Bartlett, for the dialogue. I have a couple of questions, starting with our city attorney, and then I may have a follow-up question for the board as well. Mr. Jordan, you indicated that there's already council approval for what?
Well, as staff indicated, my understanding is there's already council approval for what staff believed the grant was going to be, this $714,615 of which is for the contract, and then the balance is, I think, for some of the city's costs. So that's already been approved. So what was actually agendized reflects what council has approved. Now, from what staff had indicated, the granting agencies, generously offered an additional grant, but they would need council approval for that. I think what they'd hoped to do is to sort of get everything approved by the board, which would then allow them to go to council and then not have to come back here. Unfortunately, we're not really agendized to go into that additional grant area. If the board wants, I think it could act on what's agendized before you. It's already been approved by council. So the amendment can be prepared, adding $615,000. It could be signed. However, you'd have a couple of options. One is you could clarify in the contract amendment, given that the grant actually hasn't been awarded yet, that no notice to proceed under that amended contract should be allowed until that grant has been awarded and accepted. That's one option. The other option would be to approve the contract the amendment as agendized and allow the contractor to work, but because it has to be front-funded, the report indicates that front funding is necessary. They could allow the work to proceed, but then if for any reason the grant doesn't happen and it falls through or we fail to accept it, then the city is still obligated to pay the contractor who did the work, and that would just essentially be unreimbursed. So the city would absorb that. But that's a risk, but I think it's based on what staff is saying, a low risk. I think they're very confident the grant will occur, but at least it allows the item to be sort of moved forward somewhat. But what we really can't do based on the agenda is go to that extra step and add $1.5 million. So that should probably come back to the board. And if it comes back to the board, there probably should be some clarification, because $615,000 and then you add $1.5 million, that comes out to $2,115,000. But their suggested supplement is $2,265,000. So the numbers seem to be a little bit off, and that could probably be clarified.
So would you repeat the option of not submitting the notice to proceed?
So the contract could be amended. The board would be authorized to sign the amendment. The amendment would add $615,000 to the contract ceiling.
And that's what is agendized, yes. Go ahead.
And it would describe the additional work that would be done. However, usually with a contract, there's some type of notice to proceed. We instruct the contractor, okay, start working. The city could indicate that a notice to proceed will not issue until that grant actually comes through. So the minute we get confirmation that we have the grant now, we will be reimbursed for expenses. Tell the contractor to start. You could wait, hold them, they'd be ready to go, but they wouldn't actually start work.
Okay.
And unless because once they start working, we are obligated to pay them.
Understood.
Until the grant comes through.
Okay. That was what I wanted to make sure that we all heard on the table. Commissioner Caloza.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one comment, in that it would have been helpful to know that this was already approved by City Council. That's not noted in your board report, and anything that City Council passed was not included at all, including any attachments. So I think for me personally, colleagues, my recommendation would actually be to withdraw this item and resubmit it with all the full attachments, including anything that City Council passed, so that it's an actual full and complete board report noting past actions that the city has made and the new amounts for whatever the actual grant total is, since there seems to be some discrepancies for today.
Commissioner Garcia.
I would be okay with that, given the fact that that one then just, if we can do it right away and give it a right away turnaround so that they have time to go to council and get the entire amount approved. However, also, in addition to when you write the new board report or however it is, can you also write what the partnership with OCB is? Because I see that we have a partnership with OCB, but I'm not clear with what their role is on this. So if I can also get that explanation, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis.
Mr. President, you had mentioned earlier in the onset of this discussion the possibility of hearing this issue on Friday. And if and so that might be an option, I was wondering, given the comments that were made by Commissioner Colosa, if in fact by Friday is enough time for the Bureau of Sanitation to prepare and to make the necessary contacts and communication with the administrators in our organization and come back with us with a complete report processed as you had originally intended. And because of unforeseen circumstances, as you discussed, communication was not available for you. And I certainly understand the ingenuity and the innovation and creativity that had to take place so that we would not lose the possibility of getting this money and to achieve our goals. So having said that, my question is basically, if we extend the opportunity on Friday, it would be my hope in considering that option that the Bureau of Sanitation will have enough time to talk to everyone and to present to us a complete report that we can look at it all at once and then make a decision all at once.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. My concern with Friday now is given the given kind of the entire discussion that we've had with the options on the table from the city attorney's office, I have a couple of questions. And given Commissioner Colosa's subsequent comments, my question would be, first of all, I think that when we come back to the board, we should do so on the 72-hour standard notice. I just think it's the better way to go for this, given a record that is a bit confusing to folks that are listening in. And so that's why I think when we come back to the board, I'm perfectly fine with doing it soon. We certainly want to meet Ms. Bartlett's timeline, and if we can even do it earlier, that's even better for you and thus everybody. But I do think that we ought to have the documents properly revised to meet up with our regular standards of notice for the public that of course are very interested in this kind of a project for the community. So I have a question for Commissioner Colosa regarding do you have and you may have explained this a moment ago and I missed it, but do you have a preference? What I'm trying to do is find a way that we get agreement, if possible, on when we come back to the board and in what form. And so I was curious if you had a thought regarding the notice to proceed hold, I'll call it, that Mr. Jordan explained, or if that option is really moot based on the preference of getting kind of a complete package back to the Board of Public Works, and when would you think, and maybe that's a question for sanitation, but you know, what would be a time frame that would be satisfactory?
I mean, I definitely, we appreciate all your work. To just want to clarify that, definitely don't want to, delay and put in jeopardy this funding at all. That's not what my concern is. My concern was really related to process and just proper notice. So I think, with what Mr. Jordan said about the notice to proceed, with the amount that was already approved by City Council, I think, that makes sense. They've already have the approval. It's for this additional amount that I would add the notice to proceed hold. We want to make sure we meet your timeline, but just want to make sure that, like with all items that come before our board, and making sure that we have a full and complete record and all the attachments in place with all actions that have happened as it relates to this item. But definitely don't want to, lose any of this funding.
Right, no problem.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Colozan. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Now, the only other thing I would need, Mr. Jordan, is your counsel on maybe I'll take the first stab at what the motion would be for today, recognizing, colleagues, that if I miss something, feel free to provide a friendly amendment or even a hostile amendment if you want. Oh, Commissioner Villegas.
My question was just pertaining to timing, like when, I guess let's clear up the motion first, and then we can, I guess.
Okay, then go on to timing.
Yeah.
So, let me try to take a stab at the motion. So, my motion would be to adopt agenda item number 1. Do we need to adopt number 2 as well, Mr. Jordan, on this?
If you want to proceed with doing a contract amendment, that for the initial amount?
For the initial amount.
Then you'll need to
do 1 and 2.
approve both.
Okay, do I need to do any more than that, actually, for what we're doing going forward? Because we're not giving them the authority on anything other than the 615.
Well, I think it would be good to get clarification from the board whether it wants to authorize the OCB and the Bureau of Sanitation to proceed with actually having the contractor start its work immediately, or do you want to have them take care of all of the contract formalities, sign the amendment, and then have them wait? Again, we can do either. It's just there is that risk that there's 2 risks. If we wait until April 20th, of course, it could come in later or April, whenever it is, then we're holding them back, and eventually, since it's meant to cover 2 years and it's going to be less than 2 years, you'll lose a little bit on the back end. Or you can start immediately, and then the risk is if the grant doesn't come through, then the funds spent won't be reimbursed.
Not necessarily on that, because if we let them start immediately, it's going to take them some time to spend that money. And so we'll know by the time they spend the first money whether or not we're going to get the second money. Right?
Absolutely. And the approval for the second money, I'm just assuming that they have to go back to council. I haven't seen the council action, but let's assume that they do to get the additional 1.5 million. You know, with budget and council recesses, it may take a little while to get that. But the board would probably want to consider not waiting for that action because you got an approval already for the 615, and there's really no reason to hold back on that, other than you might have to amend the contract a second time.
So from our side, we would not authorize LA Conservation until the Corps to start work until after we have a signed contract with the state. So.
Okay, well, that clears that up. All right, thank you. So now let's talk about the timing that you would need. Assuming the board goes forward with the 615 today, you're going to come back with really a newly agendized board report that meets the notice requirements that we've discussed this morning, that clarifies the issues that have been put on the table. And of course, you can always go back and listen to the hearing and for direction. But how much time do you think, and it's really up to you, Ms. Bartlett, and your team, however much time you need for that additional work to come back to the Board of Public Works?
I think there's 2 things that could happen. One, we could go back to Council District 14 and ask for a new motion to accept the full $2.265 million. So if that were to happen, then I'd have council authority to wrap up the natural resources side. Then I can come back with that council file information to you and ask the board then to amend the OCB contract 124509 for the additional 1.5 million. The little bits of discrepancy on the funding have to do with we have to figure out how much money do I need for my part-time staff if I've tripled the amount of work. So we're kind of doing some rough estimates. We want to make sure we can get as much money to the Corps. I don't have a team of people to pull up sidewalk or dig holes. I need to rely on our partners. The 124509 contract is the one that the Department of Water and Power and City Plants have in place. City Plants is actually providing some match with the trees. So it makes sense to just keep amending the contract where the match is coming through and then it sort of goes as a package.
All right. So, well, that's really a timeline that you govern.
Right. I think if we can get the motion, we're fine. If I need to come back with a new board report requesting the authority to apply for the 2.65 or 2.265 million and all the other pieces of it, coming through our review process, coming to you for your review process, and then heading over to council, I could get hung up there. And I really need everything to be moving forward, I think, prior to that. Otherwise, it's the maintenance of the trees at the back end that is lost.
Okay. Well, yeah, we can expedite whatever needs to be done at the board level for our admin. But I do think we need to provide the proper notice. But proper notice is 72 hours. So, and you've got until the end of April. And if you need some help along the way through us, you can reach out to us. But we would like to get you started today with what we have in front of us.
That would be great.
All right. And then regarding, Mr. Jordan, regarding the future procedure for Ms. Bartlett, she can reach out to individual commissioners on that.
Well, just to kind of bottom line it,
I don't mean all five of us. I mean,
no, I know. You have something before you
or...
today, so you can act on that. No amendments are necessary. That gets them started.
Right.
They really work directly with the council to get the authority to get that extra grant. Once they have that, they can come here and get approval to do a second amendment to the contract that then is just like this one, only it says it increases the contract ceiling by 1 point something. And in the meantime, we'll have had a chance to figure out, since they're increasing the scope, how much of that can go into the contract and how much of it covers all that cost. So that's all going to happen separately. I'm not quite sure what you're asking me, though, in terms of reaching out to a commissioner.
Well, no, I think you just answered the question.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah. You just went through what a process is. But I guess my point is, if one of the five of us wants a different procedure, I would recommend that they reach out to sanitation on their own.
And we will work with the Bureau as well in helping facilitate this item being, getting all of the approvals that they need to get.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual contracts that are done, we can work directly with the Bureau, and then what they will do is bring a contract recommendation to you as a body, not individually.
Okay. All right, thank you. Then that'll be my motion on number 1, that it's written as is. Seconded by Commissioner Garcia and Commissioner Villegas and Commissioner Davis. Any objection? Without objection, that'll be the order on number 1. Thank you all. Any issue sending number 1 forthwith? We'll send number 1 forthwith, and we look forward to seeing you for the larger amount later.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Campos, have we cleared the voting items? I'm sorry, Mr. Knight.
Yes, we have, President.
Okay. Then, Mr. Spots, how much time on your oral report? Okay. Go ahead. Agenda item number 4. Oh, one moment. Mr. Sachs, do you want to wait until after the report? All right, Mr. Spots, go ahead.
Good morning, Greg Spots with Streets LA. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer and Assistant Director, and I'm very pleased to be presenting to you this morning the project, the grant-funded project, Urban Cooling and First Last Mile Strategies at the Sherman Way Station of the Orange Line Busway in Canoga Park in CD3. This project is an extension of our work on urban cooling, and it's a great example of us putting our director, Adele Hashkhalil's philosophy of integration, inclusion, and innovation into practice. In May of 2017, Streets LA became the first agency in California to place a cool pavement coating on a public street. And we did that in this neighborhood of Canoga Park at Jordan and Hart. A year later, we found out that in the new state legislature measure SB1, there was a grant opportunity to do climate resilience planning for a neighborhood. And we found out about this grant 3 weeks before the deadline. And in city time, 3 weeks is like 3 minutes. And it occurred to me that we already knew a place where we could plan an urban cooling project, because the Sherman Way Orange Line station is like 5 blocks from where we had placed this cool pavement. We already understood that this community was filled with car-light and car-free households who were transit dependent. And we thought it would be intriguing to explore, as the city gets hotter, how does that affect the last mile problem? How do we get people to use transit if it's too hot and there's no shade to walk or bike to the transit stop? We were concerned about the very quick turnaround. I met with my colleague, Fred Musavipour, and his lead on grants, Kevin Min, who's here. And I said to them, do you think that we could pull a grant application together in 3 weeks? And they said we should go for it, but we would need help. And we partnered with Councilmember Blumenfield's staff, and they were working with us every day on developing the materials to apply for this grant. We did get the application in on time. We won the grant, and you're about to learn about this really deep community engagement that took place throughout 2019. We engaged Alta Planning and Design as our contractor to run this community process and this visioning process, and they brought in Climate Resolve as a subcontractor, and Climate Resolve has been a partner with Streets LA in all of our urban cooling work. And what you're about to see is what kind of ideas can come from a really extensive community process where we make sure that we engage all the stakeholders. This was a multilingual process. We had meetings full of non-English speakers who are transit dependent. It's really a tremendous success that our team, Alta and Climate Resolve, were able to really find out what community members wanted and needed from a large menu of urban cooling options. So with that, I'd like to call up Jeff Palmer from Streets LA Engineering Services Division.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, all. Well, as Greg said, this project has been carried out by Streets LA in coordination with Councilmember Bob Blumenfield's office, the 3rd Council District. Our study area is in Canoga Park around the Sherman Way Orange Line station, and funding for this project came from a Caltrans adaptation planning grant secured by Bureau of Street Services. When we talk about the weather here in Los Angeles, we tend to transition pretty quickly from complaining about the little rain we do actually get to much more often complaining about how hot it is and when is the summer going to end. We all know those really hot days, and it turns out they're not just uncomfortable, but they can be incredibly dangerous. On top of that, scientists predict that within the next 20 to 30 years, the average temperature in Los Angeles will rise by 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and the occurrence of extreme heat days, which is when temperatures exceed 95 degrees, will dramatically increase in vulnerable neighborhoods like Canoga Park to up to 92 days per year. So the climate is growing hotter, and we need to make sure that people can safely and comfortably walk and bike to and from transit. And the hope is that the strategies we develop with this project might be able to help other heat-vulnerable communities in Los Angeles, and that the work we do in Canoga Park might serve as a model for the implementation of these strategies more broadly. To that end, Streets LA engaged consultants, Alta Planning and Design, and Climate Resolve, as Greg stated, and they've conducted rigorous research and gathered extensive data specific to heat vulnerability in our study area. Through this process, they have developed concepts and holistic approaches towards protecting the Canoga Park community from the dangers of extreme heat. Climate Resolve and Alta coordinated extensive community outreach And in Canoga Park, they found a group of stakeholders very willing to engage on these topics and quite interested in the study. The community there was also very keen on the possibility of implementation of these types of projects in their neighborhood. Future plans around these concepts involve identifying possible funding sources to turn these heat adaptation strategies into realities on the ground and developing more projects which have real and meaningful positive impacts on the lives of Angelinos. Alta and Climate Resolve and all partners involved had done incredibly great work, including beautiful and compelling animations of their design concepts, and I'm really excited for them to share them with you. One last note before I pass this off to Mark Caswell from Alta Planning and Design. I just wanted to take a moment and honor our dearly departed friend and comrade and associate, Victor Titipong Victor Chanaratai-kun, who recently passed away, and he was very involved in early phases of this project, and he is very sorely missed. So now I'm going to pass it off to Mark from Alta. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Greg. My name is Mark Caswell. I'm with Alta Planning and Design. We're a firm that was working closely with Streets LA, and as you heard, some of the other subconsultants, including Climate Resolve, Tree People, and other organizations to work with the community to help develop a plan to work to both allow people to get to transit as well as to mitigate the impacts of extreme heat. We're getting the presentation going right here, hopefully, because we've got some really great videos to show you. In short, the project had extensive outreach, as you heard from Jeff. One of the big things that we heard very clearly was safety from transportation was a priority, but also making sure that we're focusing on safety from urban heat and extreme heat. Ultimately, getting to and from transit makes it difficult when it's a 90 or 100 degree type of day. So, sure, yeah, sure. So we had three main features, and I'm realizing how tiny that is. So our three main features was to have a toolkit of types of facilities in order to make sure that we were finding ways to address the needs of the community, and then doing deep engagement with the community as well. I'm pulling up the document here so I can actually read it easier. And so community stakeholder feedback was also a key priority here, making sure that we were hearing what the community wanted and not just doing what we thought was best, but really hearing what they wanted. And then ultimately was to set up the project for securing grant funding so that this project could not only be a design and a concept and a plan and paper, but also to become something that is actually built. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're moving forward with that in the coming weeks. Next slide. So the project kicked off in early 2019, and we started with our community engagement aspects, where we met with folks, created designs, met with folks, iterated those designs, and then ultimately presented the videos that we're going to show you in a second here. And now the next steps are the outreach, continued outreach and engagement. Next slide. So we're talking about high heat, high vulnerability here. Just to make sure you all can see it. There, it's working? Okay, great. As you can see here, we focused on a half-mile corridor around the Sherman Way Orange Line station. The Orange Line is one of the busiest busways in all of Los Angeles. Has a lot of folks who ride on there. There's a lot of low-income people, people who are renters, and people who do not have access to vehicles. So this is a really key way for them to get to and from their jobs, to get to and from essential services, and we wanted to make sure that they had a way to be able to do that. As you can see here, there's a woman who has a hat that is a solar reflective hat because she herself uses a walker and has a lot of time where she's crossing the street, where she's out in the public and is exposed to extreme heat. So there are people who are taking their own measures in order to protect themselves. And the number of extreme heat days is only growing. As you can see in the bottom photos, there's lack of sidewalk as well as lack of trees and shade for people there. Next slide. And the big thing here is that there's a cycle. A lot of people drive because it's hot, and a lot of people drive because there's a lot of congestion, and a lot of people drive because there's not that many trees, and there's not that many bikeways, and there's not that many sidewalks. So people decide to not drive, or people decide to drive because they can't access the bus because of those reasons, and it creates a cycle that continues and feeds on itself. So our goal is to break that cycle. And we're going to break that cycle by looking at a few key factors here. We're talking about adding trees in order to create shade, infiltration of water to make sure that it's going underground, replenishing the surface there, not just flowing from pavement to sewer to the river and out into the ocean, but making sure we're really preserving that aspect there, and then creating streets that are safe and welcoming for people walking and biking there. And it's really important just to note that landscaping itself, not even the bikeways, not even the sidewalks, but landscaping itself has been shown to have a 46% decrease in collisions for vehicles, because people are slowing down and driving more safely when they're around a more pleasant area. And it also increases business by having folks be able to walk and bike and be able to access those local businesses. Next slide. So we looked at Canoga Park as a model here. We're not just talking about Canoga Park. This is a model for ways that we can impact the entire city, and we're looking at expanding this to other areas throughout the city. We looked at 3 corridors, and we're going to talk about each of them in just a moment. But you can see the 3 corridors there. They are Sherman Way, Owens Mouth, and the path that exists right next to the orange line right now. Next slide. So community outreach, just real quick, big numbers on there. We had 19 presentations throughout the community, 450 people participated. We talked to the neighborhood council, we talked to the BID, we talked to a lot of community groups. We had a community survey where we got over 462 folks, and this was walking around, talking to people, waiting for the bus, talking to people walking down the street. We went to farmers markets, and we had a lot of workshops there. Next slide. Right here you can see we're out there talking to folks and doing some. Next slide, Jeff. You can see that existing street. We added a roundabout, we added sidewalks, we added trees planted between the palm trees, which don't provide much shade, so we were working to make sure that we're really improving that. Next slide. We compared a bunch of different types of strategies for climate adaptation. We looked at cool pavement, as we discussed. We looked at trees. We looked at shade structures, actually building physical structures, not just for patios, but how can we build those over streets or over sidewalks, and hydration stations as well. And again, you can see we added a protected bikeway there with parking protected. Next slide. And then ultimately we brought that to the community. We went out and we talked to folks in a lot of different ways, made sure we were really making sure that folks were aware of that. And you can see here, this one, there's a farmer's market that takes place already on Saturdays, but we looked at creating a more permanent facility there where folks could be able to get together, have community concerts, have engagement activities, as well as a place for the time for people to be all day. And we looked at shade because the valley is really hot. This is similar to, if you're familiar with the Silver Lake Triangle, that was a farmer's market. It then became a permanent plaza. So we looked at looking at that in this way with Canoga Park, and the community was very excited about that. So next slide. Again, these are the 3 corridors, and now we're going to watch a video where you'll see our team created 3D renderings of the existing facilities and then put a skin over of all of the different types of opportunities, and you'll see them here of each of the 3 corridors. We're going to play the 3 back-to-back. Should play right now. Yeah. So these are the 3 corridors, and we're first going to look at Sherman Way. And so Sherman Way, this is looking at one part of Sherman Way. You can see here we're flying in. One of the things that we looked at was moving bus stops out over into the travel lane. Buses tend to get delayed when they have to pull all the way to the side and then pull back into the general flow of traffic. That actually creates delay. So by adding this facility, we're able to help buses improve their on time. This is a protected intersection, an area that's able to allow bike riders to get through without just leaving them right in the middle. Protected bikeways, you can see there's native plantings, there's bioinfiltration, there's green paint to highlight the conflict zones. And then we're going to zoom out here. And you can see one of the key factors, the community was really concerned about the crossing there on Sherman Way. We added bulb outs to reduce the crossing, to make it safer for people to cross, less exposure, added flashing yellow lights, RFBs, and hawks to help make sure that people can cross. That was something that we heard really clearly from a lot of the women who were shopping for their families. It was definitely a top priority because there's a Rancho 99 right there. The second one here is Owens Mouth. There's currently no sidewalks, and there's only the really big queen palms there. So you can see we added sidewalks. We were able to find a way to add in bikeways, a roundabout. A lot of folks talked about evening cut-through traffic, people really going fast on quiet residential streets. So how do we find a way to help disincentivize people? They can stay on Canoga Avenue. They can stay on Topanga Highway rather than gunning it at 40 miles an hour in front of someone's home. So one of the things that we heard very clearly was that we wanted to disrupt that network and make sure that we were finding ways to keep the cars on the car street and keep the people and community on the community streets. And so one of the things we had with this protected bikeway, getting over to here, as you can see, was taking that plaza into a full permanent facility to really break up that network. And obviously, there's a lot more time that could go into deciding what the colors look like on the ground and exactly what it looks like. But we would be able to add shade sails to connect buildings, as well as creating this permanent facility for folks to be able to create a new focus point for the community right there. And we would look at using the LADOT People Street application for that. And we're working right now with the community to figure out if they're ready to apply for that as the business improvement district. And then the third one right here, this is the already existing bike path. So the bike path exists. One of the big key factors was that folks said there was not enough lighting and that there was no shade and there was no place to sit. So it was kind of an area to easily move through away from traffic. And we created these cooling stations in these areas with shade, with hydration stations, with maps and placemaking. We talked about creating some pavement to make sure folks slowed down when they got to those busy areas. And then one of the big ones that we heard as we zoom here is there's a lot of windowless buildings facing the bus rapid transit and facing that. So how do we activate that? We can add murals. We can work with the community to help identify high school students, college students to really design those. And then as you get to those major corridors, there tends to be a red stoplight while you have to wait. And while you're standing there waiting that 45, 90 seconds, the heat's just really bearing down on you. And so one of the things we looked at was creating shade structures and cool pavement to help make people, while they're crossing, have a easy place to wait. The bus shelter's already existing. We wouldn't be touching that. That's Metro property also. But on the bike path, we'd be able to find a way to help create that opportunity for folks to wait. And then last slide is what's next. So next steps are really simple. Continued community outreach. We need to talk to more folks. We need to make sure that people are continue to be engaged, helping the design facilities move forward. These are concept plans. And then lastly is funding opportunities. I have a phone call in a few hours about an active transportation program application, which is a Caltrans grant that will help fund some of this work here, as well as looking at the People Street that I mentioned, as well as Measure W funds. And the city and BSS and the consultant team is already looking at ways to make this actionable and really bring this forward into real life, because the community is really asking for it. And that's it. So thank you. I can answer questions, or BSS staff is also available to answer questions.
A couple of things. First, one on the serious note, and then one not as serious but kind of serious. Mr. Spots, would you just have the slide that references the funding that we just saw? Would you email that slide over to me, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And then on the serious but not quite as serious side, your rendering was very cool, but it showed at the beginning of the rendering the green bike lanes. You know where I'm going with this. They were bright, the bright green. But when the rendering stopped, I think it was a bicyclist that stopped maybe, and you looked over at the bike lane, it was a darker shade. And you referenced the colors on the ground. Just know, as Mr. Spots knows, and I live with, even a rendering that has bright green paint in a bike lane gets reaction from filming and production companies and all the entities that represent that industry. So, because the city spent a lot of time working with their industry on the shade of green for those bike lanes that's satisfactory to everyone. And it's a little bit darker than what you've got on that rendering next time you put that thing out. All right, and then we'll go to Commissioner Villegas.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. You learn something new every day. Well, thanks for your presentation. I also wanted to get a copy, because I'm always looking at funding sources and various grants. So if you can send that over my way as well, just the slide on here with all the funding sources, that would be helpful. Thank you for pointing out the trees and the landscaping, just on I think on Sepulveda and some of the other one of the other areas, actually all of the areas. As you already know, I'm just going to reiterate this, and you're putting forth some other projects for Measure W. Just make sure that you have that connection, obviously, with best management practices for stormwater runoff in order to make your application strong.
Thank you, Commissioner Villegas. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, President James. First, I want to say congratulations to the whole team because you guys actually, I mean, I know when it comes to fruition and we have it out there in Canoga Park, it's going to be very timely, but it's also going to be very game changer for the community. And I see a lot of things going into Canoga Park in the Reseda area, which is great. I live in the valley, so I understand the heat, and I don't complain. I love the heat, so I'm happy with it. But I am happy that we are able to provide shade and places to be during the summer for our community in general. So I'm just excited about this program, and I'm excited to see it come to fruition. And any support you need, I will be happy to always lend myself to support the program. I don't really have any real questions. You guys kind of covered it all. My question is this already been approved and good to go, and we have a start date, and we have an end date, or we're still kind of in concept?
So the grant opportunity was a planning grant, and so it sort of contemplates a two-stage process where you do the planning process, and once you have the vision, then you go out and look for implementation funding to build it. So we're in the process of applying for implementation funding now.
Okay, so nothing has really started yet.
The deliverable for this grant was a vision plan.
Okay, oh, I understood, got it. I think that's all I really have. If you can just send me the whole slide, I'd like the whole pictures. It was kind of hard to see in detail, and I know where the streets are at, so I was really interested, like, for example, where the roundabout's going to be, where we're going to have that, and so forth. Other than, I do have one last question. Is there an expectation to remove parking spots from any of these areas?
It's too early to tell.
Okay.
When you get a grant like this, they actually aren't paying for you to do a detailed design. So we have a vision based on the community input, but when we get a grant to implement, we would then be doing a detailed design and actually figuring out those kind of fine level of detail.
Got it, understood. Okay, and just lastly, my shout out to Kevin on this grant also. Congratulations for working on this. So thank you to the team.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis?
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment the team for the plan. It certainly is a plan that has very, I think, complementary provisions that will help make the neighborhood and the area of the city more livable. I love your protected bike lanes, and I also am fond of the plaza area, the common area that you have created, not unlike some of the other areas throughout the city. You mentioned the Silver Lake area, and I've certainly been familiar with that area. I saw the big pots and all of that kind of thing. And also I like the roundabout and what that does in terms of what it provides in transportation flow for constituents in the area. So in summary, I'd just like to say that I believe that the plan that you have before us as you approach getting the funding to implement it certainly and clearly is one that not only makes the neighborhood much cooler, and I know that that's been something that we have done through street services, but also, again, it is a plan that, for me, appears to make it a more livable community there. So thank you for presenting today.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. I just want to say one thing, and then I want to take a 60-second recess for a quick photo with your team, as we do for these presentations. And Mr. Spotts, you have the cover of the report that you could add as well, since it's not necessarily a certificate presentation, but a presentation from you all. Our general manager of Streets LA is here, along with Mr. Spotts and his team, and I just want to compliment you. Current leadership at Streets LA has taken a streets agency, and you're turning it into a very well-respected environmental agency, which is a very unique needle to thread, and you all are doing it and leading, and other cities are noticing, and I want to thank you all for that.
Thank you so much for saying that, and I really want to commend the staff. You know, it turns out there's an enormous amount of excitement, energy, and talent within our staff if we just open the door to go the direction that you're describing. And, you know, for example, you just saw, you know, Jeff Palmer make his first presentation to the board in his career, and we just have so many people ready to be unleashed towards these exciting sustainability goals.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Spot. So we'll take just a 1-minute recess for a photo, and then we'll be right back for agenda item number 5. And Mr. Sachs, we'll take you afterwards as well. Mr. Sachs on number 4. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you again, Arnold Sachs. And I like this kind of presentation. I appreciate all the hard work that went into it. But I have a bunch of questions because I look at it from a different point of view. Because I always thought this was going to be work on a whole Orange Line. It turns out it's only essentially one community. What is the age of the Orange Line? The Orange Line Metro is planning on electrifying the Orange Line, which I think is a waste of time. It's capital improvement versus structural deficit. They have the structure already in place. They're going to waste money to electrify a line when they have so many other priorities to do in Metro. I understood there was 450 people involved in the outreach. What is the population served by these communities out of the 450? You know, they talked about voting yesterday. There's 5.5 million registered voters in LA County, and less than 50% voted for the last election. 2.2 million out of 5.5 registered out of 10 million or 11 million that live in the county. Do the math. So we have a project that they could do this outreach to, but they don't have a estimate on the number of years it's going to take to do this implementation for this grand plan and the funding that's going to be involved, and how's Metro going to, and Metro has bike paths and all kinds of different programs. I have the Vulcan Mind Meld. It's like this. I take it from Spock, Vulcan Mind Meld. It doesn't really help my vision, but it helps my mind. There was a Vision Zero plan. Metro had a first and last mile meeting. They're thinking about microtransit, which involves them implementing a program to replace Uber and Lyft. They also had somebody who came up with... Oh, darn.
Thank you, sir. So the oral report will be received on agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 5 is a Recicla update from sanitation. Mr. Herman, you have a card on number 5? Okay, well, why don't we start with you on number 5?
Get my documents out of my pocket here. Where's the clock? Why don't we have a clock in here? You guys want to start corruption early, huh? Well, corruption starts when Mitch Englander and developers in the mixed use of city properties and city lighting, city street services, city contracts, you're all a part of the big corruption of Mitchell Englander. All of you. Because you misuse state and federal dollars, Mrs. Caloza. Because that's why little Joey quit. Remember when little Joseph was sitting up there in your seat, ma'am, Jessica? And what did he do? He stepped out of the picture because he was involved in corruption. And if you pick up the California section of the LA Times, you'll figure out what the fuck I'm talking about. So when you abuse my monies for infrastructure, my monies for maintenance, my monies for services, the FBI will entertain you with subpoenas. The FBI will come in here and demand. So which of you's first? Which of you want to get in line with Englander and Kanabi and Allen, the LLC's motherfuckers that have been putting Wayne Spindler and Armando Herman through hell? Which one of you? Not one of you. You don't even pick up your fucking heads because you know I'm right. Read the paper. Read that fucking fake news. Because it's all about Dean Logan. It's all about Donald Trump. Vote for Trump and keep that fucking nigger out of our country. You, Obama. 0950529 for the record. Mr. Attorney, dealing with Bagdasarian versus United States. Now United States versus Englander. Fuck the city of Los Angeles.
Mr. Sachs on number 5. Mr. Sachs? I guess Mr. Sachs has left the room. Mr. Sachs on number 5? Number 5, sir? No, it's a different kind of hearing.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Arnold Sachs. So based on what I've heard from today's meeting, there are grants applicable to the city and the city districts.
We're on Recicla, you know that, right?
We're on Recycle
five.
LA update.
Yeah.
So, again, we heard one report where one CD district got a $2.3 million grant. Does each council district apply for its own specific grants, or they use the Board of Public Works, they use a different public agency to apply for grants per CD district? Is that essentially how business is done for the city of Los Angeles? Why some districts are dirt poor and other districts get a lot of grant money because they have people that are more proficient in writing grants? The Recycle LA update. The city council passed a motion or an agenda item where they're going to eliminate single-use bottles for drinking water. It doesn't really work really well for the rest of the actual people that live in the city, because a lot of people use single-use drinking. They're recyclable. They're not single-use if they're recyclable. So how do you define single-use if it's something that can be recycled? Like almost any bottle can be recycled. Any plastic bottle can be recycled, except maybe detergents. But they're not banning detergent bottles, and they're not banning chemical bottles. They're banning water bottles. But water bottles are recyclable, so that means they're not single-use. But this is city council action. So the idea that you're going to get an update from the city on doing something correct, I need to put my Vulcan mind meld back together.
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. Jabari Brown? morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, President James and the board, for your attention. My name is Jabari Brown. I'm representing the Los Angeles Food Policy Council's Food Waste Recovery and Prevention Working Group. Our group includes community members, retail organizations, nonprofits, government agencies, and other stakeholders interested in the food waste reduction policies. Our members completed a survey last month on food waste, which asked the question, what topics would you like more information on? Clarity and evaluation of our existing food waste policies was the #1 answer. So I would like to first celebrate the existing efforts for this forward-thinking policy goal to reduce and eliminate food waste through the Recycle program. It's put LA and LA County at the forefront of the fight against food waste. Second, I would like to express the working group's ask for increased clarity on what's being done to reduce and eliminate food waste. Third, I'd like to express the working group's ask for reassurance that what's being done matches with the policy goals. Finally, we have monthly meetings. The next one is March 25th at goodfoodla.org. We'd like to invite the board commissioner or commissioners working with LA SAN to attend and to facilitate a wider conversation with other interested parties on food waste prevention, reduction, funding, and organization. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Brown, don't go away real quick. One moment. Thank you for coming in this morning. I wanted to offer you, I didn't want to ask, you don't have to give us a business card or anything. I didn't have information here, but we have a staff member at the Board of Public Works that's working on this issue. Mr. Knight's going to write, his name is Kelvin. Mr. Knight's going to
Kelvin
write.
Garone.
Well, I'm sorry?
Kelvin Garone? His last name?
Kelvin Garvan?
Garvan. That's
Have you
right.
been in touch with him?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure the two of you were connected.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Thank you for coming in. Okay, so, Mr. Myers, let me tell you what we're going to do with our updated hearing this morning. The primary purpose of the update this morning was related to the waste management investigation for the commingling incidents that occurred a couple of months ago. Mr. Janos, the reason I didn't call your name before is we consider you, rather than general public comment, a real party in interest. So there's no limit on your time, but we'll get to that when we get to you. So from sanitation, Mr. Myers, if you could provide the update, the kind of where sanitation is, what has been completed, what is left to be done. Then we're going to hear from Mr. Janofson from Waste Management, and we may have questions, of course.
Very good. Good morning. Dan Myers, LA Sanitation and Environment. As President James said, this oral report is actually a continuation of the oral report that we gave to board on January 8th. During that report, there were significant discussions on the issues that arose when the city learned that waste management was commingling solid waste and source-separated recyclables. At that time, on the January 8th meeting, LA San had not completed its investigation, and we understood that waste management's investigation was still ongoing. LA San has completed its investigation, and today I'll go over the various aspects of the investigation and what we found. To start with, we did thoroughly review the videos provided by CBS Channel 2 News. Upon review of those videos, LA San did determine that there were 5 instances of commingling in violation of the Recycle contracts. As a result, LA San issued and assessed liquidated damages totaling $5,000. To date, Waste Management has paid $4,000 of those liquidated damages and has appealed one of them. That appeal is currently under review by LA San. It was clear that there were a number of issues that occurred at 11168 Acama Street that were in direct violation of the Recycle contract and were addressed in the assessment of liquidated damages and the notice of violation that was issued to Waste Management. However, LA San sought to determine if the noted issues were isolated or systemic to Waste Management's operation, or the recycler program as a whole. LA Sand performed a variety of different analysis. The first analysis we performed was an analysis of blue bin densities at Waste Management. LA Sand reviewed Waste Management's average in-bin density of recyclables for their entire operation and compared those to the route that included the 1168 Acama Street. The intent of this comparison was to see if the average in-bin densities were similar. For instance, if the average density on the Acama Street route was found to be significantly lower, this could indicate that commingling was more widespread. As part of our data review, LA Sand analyzed 6 months worth of route data for both the black and blue bins and weight tickets specific to black and blue bins for the route on 1168 Acama Street. The analysis indicated that the route with 11168 Acama Street actually had a higher blue bin density than Waste Management's average for both of their zones for blue bins. Specifically from June 2019 to November 2019, the blue bin density on the Acama Street route was 26% higher than Waste Management's average. This analysis did not support a widespread issue along the entire route of Acama Street. LA Sand did the same analysis at a much higher level for all of the RSPs in an effort to determine if the issue of commingling, solid waste, and recycling was widespread or endemic amongst the other RSPs. LA Sand reviewed the overall density of recyclables. This provided a very high-level assessment for any anomalies. If the densities were found to be considerably lower, it may indicate that recyclables were not actually being collected. Side-by-side comparison of the recyclables of the densities did not reveal any noticeable anomalies. LA Sand reviewed Waste Management's service tickets, we call them service requests, for anything related to commingling. The public and customers can report any instances where they believe that an RSP, a recycler service provider, are mixing the contents of their black bin with either their blue or green bin. When a customer calls in, a very specific code and notes are used when they mention commingling. We ran a report for all of 2017, 2018, and 2019. Waste Management only had 15 reports of mixing bin contents over that what would be a 2.5-year period. We started in July of 2017. Five of those service tickets were in 2019. This is compared to Waste Management handling over 1 million blue bins per year. So 5 tickets over 1 year, 1 million bins handled. It's also important to note that our RSPs are allowed to reroute or and treat contaminated bins as solid waste under very specific circumstances. Those circumstances are if a bin is tagged and noticed for contamination, they have to create a service request, send that service request into the city, and follow a set of procedures. The reason that is allowed is because what we don't want is introduce contamination into the blue bin truck as a whole, that would then could further contaminate the load. So there are some specific instances where it could be. That's why we have to go and review any service requests. LA San also performed the same review for all RSPs over the same time period. Again, and over the course of 2017, 18, and 19, we discovered that there were 48 tickets generated for commingling over that 2.5-year period, 11 of which were from 2019. Important to note that over the same period, there were over 15 million blue bins collected. LA San also went back and reviewed all of the field notes associated with our Recicla inspectors for a certain time period. We have a team of field inspectors dedicated to the Recicla program. The inspection staff often interacts with the Recicla customers. If they have a conversation with the customer, their conversations are usually captured in the terms of notes on their inspection report. LA San performed a word search review of its field inspection records for common words to commingling, such as mixing loads. The period of review was from September 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. The idea was it's a very large effort to go through, because it's not just a simple report that has to be run. We actually have to go into the notes for each inspection record. So the results for waste management revealed that there were no inspection notes for just that time period related to commingling for waste management. Again, to see if the same applied for all of our RSPs, we conducted the same word searches for the same time period for all RSPs, and we found that there was one instance of an inspector noting that a customer made reference to an RSP commingling bins. LA San also performed a route spot check, a surveillance per se, of all of our RSPs. LA San assigned a special surveillance citywide. The Recicla inspector team has performed random route surveillance or monitoring whenever they identify or see a Recicla collection vehicle. What they do is they will follow that inspection vehicle for 2 or 3 stops, just to monitor to see if there was any instances of commingling along those routes. Additionally, any of the addresses that we identified that had potential commingling, the 48 that we talked about, we also went out and visited their sites on their blue bin collection days and monitored to see if there was any commingling happening at those sites. We did not identify any commingling from the surveillance that we performed. In addition, LA San performed specific site inspections at 11168 Akama Street to check for contamination and verify service. The assigned inspectors were on site from 6:30 in the morning to approximately 2 p.m. Based upon when the blue bins and black bins were collected. Specifically, we were out on December 11th and December 18th. The Recicla inspectors did not observe any excessive contaminations in the blue bins, and did observe that the black bin and blue bin were collected correctly. As we received another instance, another video showing mixing of black bin and blue bin at the same address, we went back out and performed the same site check on January 16th, 22nd, 29th, February 5th, 12th, 19th, and 26th. And again, did not observe commingling of bins. From all of that, our findings are this. Waste management's drivers did commingle solid waste and recycling at 11168 Akama Street. And waste management failed to follow city procedures for correctly documenting contamination. Based upon our investigation performed and the documentation provided to date, LA Sand did not uncover any data that supports systemic or widespread commingling of materials within waste management or the Recicla program as a whole. It is our understanding that Waste Management has concluded their investigation. They submitted a final report to the city on March 3rd. I believe they have a representative here, Mr. Doug Cochran, that will go over their findings.
Thank you. Mr. Myers, one thing that is in your report regarding the enforcement action plan to eliminate the commingling within the Recicla program, we've heard from a number of the haulers back in the January hearing what they were doing regarding cameras on trucks and such. But for the oral record, would you go through sanitation's, please?
Sanitation's protocols?
Yeah.
Well, some of the things that we have done to
you got 4 bullet points, but go ahead.
I got 4 bullet points.
Yeah, page 14.
Yeah, sorry, let me go back to page 14.
Okay.
I don't recall all of them.
I'm making an oral record here as well.
Yes, sir. Well, we are going to starting immediately when the videos came in. We worked with our customer care center, and we're now closely tracking all service requests that come in where the customer has mentions commingling or mixing of material in any ways. And that will allow us to stay on top of any instances where there is a claim. Our inspectors are continuing to do their surveillance. So when they see a Recicla collection vehicle, they don't necessarily know if it's a black bin collection truck or a blue bin or a green bin, but they will follow it. And they'll follow it for a number of stops just to monitor it to see if the material is being collected correctly and whether contamination is occurring. Also, as stated with waste management, the city has a set of protocols of what needs to happen if a bin is noted as being contaminated. We're working closely with all the RSPs to ensure that all those steps are followed for any tagged container. And then, of course, if any violations of the contract will either result in the assessment of liquidated damages where appropriate or contract violation notices.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Myers before we move along? We may come back to you in a moment, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Jonas? You put in a speaker card, sir. Would you like to speak now, or do you want to speak later? I have Doug Corcoran from Waste Management. we're going to hear from them, but everybody will have the chance to respond to anybody else. Okay, come on forward.
Good morning, John Janos. I'm the owner of the property that on Acoma Street, and felt important that I actually am part of this meeting because I documented 5 months of detailed video, not just the couple of snippets that you guys saw and that sanitation reviewed. And it's important because sanitation didn't bother to come and talk to me about all the other video. They finally, about a week ago, came and did a brief interview, which is summarized in a couple of small paragraphs. But if you watch the videos for 5 months, as I have, it does not paint the rosy picture that you just heard. What it does paint is a systematic approach to mishandling recycling. And if you look at what happened at Acoma Street, Waste Management has a 95% failure rate. Once out of 20 times did they actually do the job that they're being paid to do. That is not an accident, that is deliberate. And when you deliberately bill people for something that you are not doing, it's fraud. You don't have to take my word for it. I actually have it on video, and it much more frequently than the two examples that you saw or CBS 2 was able to air. But more importantly, what you see is a systematic attempt at covering up the fact that they are not recycling. When the recycling gets thrown out with the trash in the morning, the recycling truck still drives up in the afternoon, and it pauses in front of the building, and its sole purpose in doing so is to log a GPS record of the fact that it's been there. Nobody gets out of the truck, or if they do get out of the truck, they walk around a little down the driveway. They don't even go and look at the recycling bin. And this is because they know that the recycling bin was picked up. It's a coordinated effort. Now, if that recycling bin were in fact contaminated, there would be no reason.
2 minutes.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Knight, I'd mentioned that Mr. Jonoff has a real party and interest. It doesn't have the same time limit. Go ahead, sir.
If that bin were in fact contaminated, there would be no reason for that recycling truck to stop, pause there, and create a false record. That false record is what gets turned over to sanitation. Those false records are what is in the documentation that the gentleman before me just cited you. You cannot rely on the information that you're getting from them. When I call Waste Management, and I don't even have to have them always on video. I'll give you an example. When I go to a different property, and my experience, by the way, is not just Acoma Street. I manage a dozen properties from Canoga Park to North Hollywood to Studio City. And Acoma Street is just indicative of the typical waste management behavior. But I can arrive at a property at 10 a.m. I see the recycling bin and the trash bin are empty. I have a pretty good idea of what happened. The next day, you call Waste Management and say, what time was my recycling picked up? And they'll tell you, whatever, 3:25 p.m. But you saw the bin empty at 10 a.m. It's pretty obvious, even without video, that it's a systematic process of avoiding picking up the recycling. There is no reason that the morning shift should do double the work of taking 2 bins out and the afternoon shift still showing up to do nothing except for the fact that it saves money for Waste Management. Now, after this story aired, obviously, the data becomes completely skewed because they're on their best behavior. I've watched the video since then, too, and no, they've taken out both bins as they should up to that point. But what they do is they change tactics. On December 26th, my recycling bin was slapped with a contamination notice. That notice, right here, was marked with 3 additional contamination check marks so that they could basically, at free will, throw recycling into the trash for the next 3 weeks into the future. This is just a standard operating procedure, any way that they can avoid it, and it shows up in the video time and time again. But what really brought me in here was that in January, they stood before you and they blatantly lied to you. They told you that my bins were contaminated, and knowing that that would be the first thing that they would claim, I actually photographed the bins before pickup. They lied to you, telling you that my bins were full of construction debris. Well, not only did I photograph the bins, but the construction at the property was completed in September, and the video that CBS 2 aired was from November. And I was on site every day during construction to monitor it, and I watched our debris go out in lowboys. I know for a fact that no construction debris was in any of those bins. They tell you that their drivers are checking those recycle bins to make sure that they're contaminated before throwing them away. Well, again, I have video upon video of those drivers not looking in those bins, simply shipping them out to the street to be loaded into a truck. The only time they, in fact, on the video opened the bin was to take recyclables from the recycling bin and put them into the trash bin. Now, any way that you put this together over a 95% failure rate over 5 months, it's basically fraud. The fact that they're falsifying documentation to disguise the fact that they're not doing the job is really the definition of fraud. I'm astounded by the statistics that the Sanitation Department just cited, because they have absolutely nothing to do with what is clearly evident on video. It's completely believable that if Waste Management is doing a systematic project of throwing out recyclables, that whatever their weights are in one district is going to be on par with the other. I mean, you can't, and I've seen evidence of this not just at my buildings, but at other buildings down the street. Of course, you see none of that evidence now after this has come to light. You can stand in front of my building all day and you'll never see them do it. Probably can observe any building in town and they won't do it right now. But that doesn't change what happened. And frankly, it's illegal. And you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar contract for which you've given them a $5,000 slap on the hand. I've read the contract back and forth. There's a lot of issues with the way sanitation enforces it. But ultimately, you have the ability to terminate their contract for cause. Section 1522 cites dishonest behavior as an immediate reason for dismissal. I don't know what's more dishonest than continuously doing this and then falsifying the documentation that they're recycling it. This is corporate America ripping off the environment. It's corporate America ripping off the city of Los Angeles, effectively enabled by the city of Los Angeles. It's corporate America ripping off every citizen at the expense of the environment. And any of these items, I'm happy to provide additional video or clarification.
Thank you, sir. I just have one or two questions for you, just a couple of clarifications. You'd indicated that you had 12 properties, and you'd indicated in various parts of the city. Are those properties serviced all by Waste Management, or do you have other haulers as well?
No, they're serviced all by Waste Management.
All by Waste Management, okay. And then I made an assumption, and I thought I should ask you, regarding the January 8th hearing. You had the opportunity to listen to that hearing online?
I saw a video from CBS 2.
Okay,
and
thank you.
excerpts from it.
Great. Commissioner Davis.
You said that you had taken pictures of the can of your trash bin prior to it having been reported as being contaminated?
I took pictures of the bins almost before every single pickup to be able to prove that they were not contaminated, knowing that that would be the first thing that they would say.
On your pictures, is it a time and date stamped?
They should be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from Mr. Janos? Thank you, sir. Mr. Corcoran? So a couple of things, Mr. Corcoran. One, I know you have an updated report that you're going to summarize, but obviously we want you to respond to the record now.
You want me to do that first? So
it's up to you.
Doug Corcoran, Waste Management. And I assume by the record, you're meaning
just-
Mr. Janus.
Yes, what we just heard. What's in the oral record today, either from sanitation, obviously from Mr. Janus as well, and we'll ask sanitation to do the same thing. Go ahead.
Let me start with sanitation. Our investigation reached the same conclusion as theirs, that there's no systemic, widespread commingling going on, and has not, by Waste Management. And I'll get to that when I run through the kind of the summary of our report. As far as Mr. Janev's statements, I'd like to see the videos. Let's see the videos and the pictures, and let's sit down and look through them. And if there's something there that we missed and sanitation missed, then we'll address that. Or if there's an explanation, we'll provide the explanation. So I'm happy to do that, whatever it takes.
All right, you want to talk about the details of your investigation?
Sure. So let me start with some numbers. It was a 3-month investigation. We started in December, about the middle of December, and went all the way through until a couple weeks ago. 3 attorneys ran it, 2 outside, 1 in-house, and we had 2 investigators from our security team, both of them retired police detectives, one from New York and one from, I believe, Phoenix or another city in Arizona. We covered 2 years. We didn't cover 3 years. We covered 2018 and 2019. We service about 16,000 customers in our areas. And during those 2 years, we actually had over 7 million lifts. That's each time a truck lifts and dumps a can, which in a way, if we think about it in the context of what we're talking about, that's 7 million chances to get it wrong and do something, commingle or something. As part of the investigation, we interviewed 39 employees, including the ones that were in the video that everybody's seen. We spoke to over 100 customers, 95 face-to-face, and I don't know, some number, 15 or so on the phone. And what did we find? We found 11 service requests over that period of time that identified potential commingling. After the Bureau gets a chance to go through our report, we'll probably sit down. There's directionally, we're in the same place, but there's a few details that we don't agree with them on, and we'll just have to work through that with them. But it's 11 SRs at 7 properties. So it's 11 service requests out of 7 million lifts and 7 properties out of 16,000 that get served at least once a week for 2 years. Of the 11 service requests, like I said, this is where we'll have to sit down and go through details with Bureau of Sanitation. We did not come to the same conclusion on the number of commingling. We think maybe there's like twice. The rest, we believe, is a failure to follow the proper process for contamination, notification, and recording, which Mr. Myers alluded to. Okay, so what else did we find? Well, we talked every driver, every supervisor, every employee we talked to understands the program, and they understand the prohibition against commingling. Even the guys that were in the video, they all said they know. We're not supposed to do it. This is a recycling program, and everybody's on board with that. Other than the customers in the SRs, none of the ones we interviewed observed what they believed was commingling. So, this is all in our attempt to understand if this was systemic and widespread, because I can tell you there's nobody anywhere that cares more about that than Waste Management, because we've invested the hundreds of millions of dollars in recycling. We don't want this to go south. During this period of time, 2018, between 2018 and 2019, we've had a 21.8% increase in the volume of recycling that we collect. So in our mind, that means the program's working, and it certainly speaks against any conclusion that there is some widespread attempt to avoid recycling. But we did find some things, areas that we need to improve in. One is training. So it's mostly around this notification process. Our drivers were not quite getting it, and so that's what left kind of the Bureau in a position of looking at an SR and not having a solid record in their minds that said, okay, we can establish it was or was not commingling. So we got to fix that, and we've put in new training. We've rewritten a lot of the programs, and what we've done is we've basically switched the kind of the nature of the training to step-by-step instructions as opposed to generally pointing drivers towards don't do this or don't do that. It's like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Here's the 4 things you need to do at a minimum. We need to get our route managers out of the office and out in the field more. And so we've made changes in the assignment of work so that administrative tasks have been moved over to office personnel, and the route managers can be out there. There's nothing that beats a route manager being in the field in real time, being able to help the drivers when they run into a situation and they have a question. They can solve it right then. We needed to improve our internal communication. There were a couple of times that we dropped the ball, and the right information didn't get to the right people. Could have solved a lot of the problems and maybe not even have been here. So we've done that. We've expanded the list, the distribution list. We have a very specific event-based response for communication and who gets contacted, and it rolls up above the on-the-ground supervisors, goes to their manager, and then goes up another level. So lots of people. There'd be no falling through the cracks that we can see. We needed to increase the interface and the interaction between drivers and our outreach people. So we've had our outreach people. We've got 32 people out there every day talking to customers about how to recycle, how to increase the recycling, what's the best way to do it, all of those things. But we feel that they can do a better job if they were closer to the drivers. So now there's mandatory meetings between the drivers and the outreach personnel. There's a outreach personnel are assigned to specific areas with specific drivers so that there's continuity and there's an open and free dialogue. They know each other. They're in it together. They're working on trying to solve the problem in their particular area together. And then if there is any sort of a indication of or a report of commingling or any question at all, then those outreach people are going to be notified and they can get out there too. So we've got layer over layer of let's solve the problem. We need better monitoring. And that basically is going to be solved by our technology solution, which we call Smart Truck. And essentially it's cameras on the truck, continuous video monitoring.
On the cameras on the truck, Mr. Corcoran, what's your timing on that?
So we've got about 40% of the trucks, maybe 45 of them already fitted with the cameras. Our maintenance folks tell us they'll be done by the end of the month. That seems pretty fast to me, but that's what they said. But definitely by April, we will have those trucks, our cameras on the trucks. We'll be testing them, making sure we chase all the bugs out. So I think I committed when I was here before to be done in the second quarter. It looks like we'll get done early in the second quarter rather than towards the end of the second quarter, and it'll be up and running.
Would April 30th be a fair enough date for you to be able to commit to us those cameras would be done by?
I can definitely commit to them being on the trucks. I don't think I'm ready to commit to all the bugs being worked out. I believe it will be. So can I give a soft commitment and then and say, very shortly thereafter, I think we'll probably have that done. There's 120 trucks, and we want to make sure that everything.
Yeah,
okay. You want to? I get it. As soon as possible.
The board, we're going to schedule there will be a subsequent hearing where you'll have the opportunity to provide that update, and I'm guessing it'll be around that time anyway. But go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, the details of what we found are in the report. The report is 32 pages long, and we provided it to the Bureau. I didn't want to get in front of them before they've had a chance to really look at the details so we can talk through it. But I did touch on the areas that we specifically, what we found and what we're doing about what we found.
I've got a question. Waste Management appealed one liquidated damages assessment on $1,000. I'll just tell you what my note says right here. Really?
I know, it's not about the money. It's about the process. There was, I'll tell you the nature of the appeal is this is,
if the LD or whatever it was about record keeping and closing the loop, probably just would have said okay, because there was a tag on the bin, the drivers followed all the processes they're supposed to follow. We didn't get that up to the Bureau. You know, it's not about the money, it's about we got a process, we got a program, we just want to stick to it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Davis.
I want to find out, you did give us some corrective measures that I guess are being implemented, and obviously they are stated in your report. In the assessment given in their findings from the Bureau of Sanitation, they noted that there was not a creation of service requests that correctly documented contamination at one of the addresses. In your corrective recommendations that will be implemented, did you address that issue in terms of the appropriate reporting?
We did, sir, yes.
And how would that be achieved?
So that goes back to the training, which is there needs to be a minimum of 4 steps that a driver who observes the contamination takes. And those are basically observe it, tag it, take a picture, send it to dispatch. Dispatch then will review the picture, and they will determine whether they agree with the driver or not. If they agree with the driver, then it becomes an actual SR at that point. If they disagree and they say, we don't think it's as contaminated as you think it is, then the driver was instructed to go ahead and service the bin as recycling and move on.
The other issue that was raised by the Bureau of Sanitation was that, in fact, the Bureau, in their investigation, were not allowed an opportunity to interview or question the employees involved in the matter. Can you elaborate on that issue?
Yes, I can, and I know that was a request or at least interest from here at the board, and I'm going to address that kind of from the driver's standpoint, because the question was, we want to have the drivers who were in the videos get interviewed by the Bureau of Sanitation. So I'll tell you what they went through. First of all, they're on television in a story that doesn't look good for them or anybody, right? Then they're suspended, pending investigation. So they're home now. Now they got to explain to their kids, their families, why they're not going to work. And everybody sees them on television too. And that's just, so suspension is, that's embarrassing for anybody. Going home and having to explain that to your kids, that's, I don't know, I know what I would feel. I'd feel kind of ashamed a little bit that I'd be there. Then we put them through several interviews with the attorneys and these retired detectives. These are no joke people when it comes to interviews. So we ran them through that. So the anxiety's building. So we finally bring them back after we kind of conclude that. And now they have to face their coworkers. All their coworkers have been worried about whether or not this is going to blow up their jobs. And everybody's going to be, So now they're facing those guys. So they go from embarrassment to some kind of shame to almost like humiliation with it. And then I thought to myself, okay, now, do I actually send them into the Bureau to be, from their standpoint, that's going to be interrogated by the government. So after all of this stuff, they're sorry, they apologized, they promised they'll never do it again. There's no indication anywhere in any of the statistics or the other interviews that there would be any direction from management to the drivers. And that was really the concern that folks had was did management direct the drivers to do that? There's nothing that supports that, absolutely nothing.
My
And
question,
I just thought
though,
it was too much.
Not to interrupt you, my question is why the employees were not allowed to talk to sanitation. And I wanted you to elaborate on why they were not allowed.
Well, I thought it was too much for them. It's just piling on.
Well,
they just went through a lot.
Let me ask you this question. You have a contract, right, with the city?
Yeah.
And the person who helps manage that contract is the Bureau of Sanitation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it would be an employee-employer relationship to some degree that you have with sanitation, correct? And we have before us a problem that interferes with the performance that is promised in the contract, correct? Would you assume as an administrator that it's reasonable that there could be some communication with sanitation as it relates to that performance, given the seriousness of the concern here?
I agree that it's reasonable, and I feel that our report addressed that concern.
My question specifically is regarding the ability to communicate with the people involved. And so my answers hopefully are related to that answer that you're going to give me as it relates to why they could not talk to sanitation as it relates to this issue. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Could it have been possible that sanitation would have talked to them not at home in front of their children, that perhaps it would be in a business environment where they could focus and zero in on the issues of concern that we're discussing?
Well, I mean, all of that is possible, yes, sir.
I have a second question for you. The option to have a written statement, was that something that sanitation was open to?
We did discuss that, I think, but that sort of just was a discussion, and then it was no follow-up discussion about that, so I actually
Now, when you say
didn't think about that.
When you say follow-up, explain to me what you mean when you say that there was no follow-up. Who was supposed to follow up on a written statement?
Well, nobody was. It was just somebody, I think I don't remember the specifics.
Did sanitation ask for a written statement in lieu of an interview?
They said, is that a possibility, or I think what they said is, we do that sometimes here. I think that's more like.
So they offered you an opportunity to have a written statement if it were true in your original premise that because of everything that they have been through, that it would be difficult for them to do a personal interview, and yet this option that was offered by sanitation, which in fact was a written statement, and your response to the written statement was, I'm unclear.
Yeah, it wasn't actually an option offered. It was more like a, hey, we do this. And then we didn't really follow up on that.
Do you think they had a discussion about what they do? For what purpose would they give you that discussion about a written statement?
I think they had heard the board or some of the commissioners say they'd be interested, and they were trying to cover that.
Do you think sanitation was requesting written statements as an option in which they could communicate with the drivers?
I didn't get that sense. I got the sense that these are things you can do. Remember what the board said, and you do what you want to do. Basically, that's the sense I got.
I just want to be clear. You think that really sanitation suggested that you can do what you want to do? I just want to be clear.
They said it's your investigation. And
I beg your pardon?
It's your investigation, and, we're not telling you how to run your investigation.
So basically, sanitation went out, and correct me if I'm wrong, they went out, they wanted to interview, and you told them they couldn't, and they just somehow start talking about written statements, and then they suggested, either verbally or non-verbally, that you don't have to do anything, basically. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that's correct. I don't think they suggested we don't have to do anything.
I'm kind of confused by your prior statement that they said you could do what you want to do. I'm confused. You did inference that prior to my asking the follow-up question.
Right.
So now I'm trying to find out this discussion that sanitation had, or maybe they didn't have, as it relates to a written statement that could have been used as a tool of communicating with the drivers.
Yeah, so President Pro Tem Davis, I can tell you what I was thinking when we had the conversation, and we could talk about what it might have been or how else it might have gone or anything like that, but I can tell you what I was thinking during the conversation and why I said I'd rather not make the drivers available after all they've been through. I can tell you all of that, but all the other potential interpretations and everything that you're asking me to opine on, those were not in my mind when I was talking to the Bureau. And I mean, we did a full comprehensive investigation. I felt that it was very thorough, and so I wasn't.
Hold on 1 second. one
Okay.
second. Certainly, you're entitled to your remarks, and you are entitled to explain to me what took place, and I do hear you, and I am not disrespecting you, but neither do I want to be disrespected. So, having said that, the goal here is to communicate and get to the bottom line on the problem, and that in your contract you have kind of an employee-employer relationship with sanitation, and they are held with the responsibility of enacting some review and evaluation of a problem that is occurring with regard to the Department of Public Works. We are indirectly responsible for the service being provided, or you could say the service that has not been provided. If we are to get to the moment of truth in that process, it is critically important that we have an opportunity to communicate effectively to find out what the facts are. I do realize you have some responsibility as well in terms of investigating, but your responsibility to investigate does not negate or take away the reality that sanitation has an equal responsibility to do so. That responsibility was, or at least it appears to have been impeded in some way in terms of their, I think, their requests to meet with these guys. And I don't know if you're telling me they really were winking and not really wanting to meet with them or not. I'm kind of confused on what you're communicating to me. But what I'm concluding here is that it was important for them to communicate, and that there were two efforts to do that and to achieve that. One, to meet with them personally, and it didn't have to be in front of their family. I would have suspected that someone would have had the sense to put it in an appropriate environment in which to have an interview around a serious matter like this, number one. And then number two, it was available to have a written statement where certainly the children didn't have to be involved in seeing that. And that could have been submitted to sanitation, and that was not done. Finally, let me say this. When you talk about training, I've heard your issue as it relates to training, and you have focused on instruction and improving the instruction. But one of the things you have not mentioned in training is the verification that the participants have grasped and have obtained the goals and objectives that we have focused on to instruct in the training. So one of the things I think is critically important for you to mention and for you to focus on as it relates to the training is what vehicle do you have in the training process that lets us validate that the participants have learned and have understood what we have sought to train? How do we know that the drivers understand specifically what specific steps that you are requiring of them? What in the training lets us know? What in the training reflects the validation that participants have learned what we've attempted to train?
They're required to pass a test after each training.
Okay, you didn't mention that there was a test.
That's right, I didn't
And
get
that's
to that.
important for those of us on the Board of Public Works to evaluate this problem. You have to mention that there is a test. So since there is a test, on this test, what will take place summarily? I know I don't want you to go through all of the questions of the test, but summarily, what will be on the test?
So the training is step-by-step instructions, and then essentially the drivers would be required in the test, or are required in the test, to identify and or repeat those step-by-step instructions, and it's a documented test. So it's an absolute knowledge test for the training they just underwent.
Okay, I thank you for at least discussing with us the response of waste management, and certainly it is my hope to talk with sanitation about our relationship with you as it relates to our ability to find out about problems, and then you're not the only one that has to implement solutions. We have, from our perspective, the responsibility of implementing solutions equally. And so we can't be impeded in the process of getting all the information we need to further define and sharpen our role, because at the end of the day, you are a contractor, you are a vendor, but legally, we are still held with the responsibility to deliver a service. So even though you are delivering it by the contract and we have that contract, we can hold you accountable to it, but holding you accountable does not alleviate the responsibility we have to the general public. And so I'm just going to say, while I appreciate the corrective action, I am concerned and going to talk to sanitation about our relationship with you as it relates to when we can find out the details of problems and when we can get all of the information so that moving forward, both of our hands won't be tied in acting expeditiously at the level we are. This is a bureaucracy here that involves more than you, and I would love to see much more performance as it relates to the ability of sanitation to communicate with you and to get answers so that they can be more effective. And I think that you're impeding that, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Davis. I was the one, and then I'll go to Commissioner Caloza, as I recall in the January 8th hearing that made the request to allow sanitation to interview the employees, and it was clear from the conversation that we had and my colleagues specifically that one of the goals of that was to protect the employee. That was one of our purposes in making that request, because there was concern, as you recall from that hearing, that this could have been done at the direction of their superiors, and that was a concern that and we didn't want any of these of your drivers to possibly have been improperly disciplined or disciplined when they shouldn't have been if the scenario was different. So just so I'm just putting a reminder on the record is the basis for at least the initial request to allow sanitation to interview the drivers. Commissioner Caloza.
Thank you, President James. Can you just remind everyone what the total contract amount is that you have with the City of Los Angeles?
Oh, gosh, like the revenue of the contract?
Is it in the millions, in the thousands?
Yes. It's.
You don't know your contract
Well,
amount?
no, I know it. I'm just trying to think about the length of time. I think it's fair to say it's $100 million a year.
$100 million a year. And how many years have you had this contract for?
2 years, a little over 2 years.
I wanted to follow up and just echo the concerns that President James and I think also Commissioner Davis for the questions that he brought forth about the interviews. And just wanted to also state for the record that I agree completely. I did not think that that was an optional part of this investigation when we last met. I know both you and the Bureau of Sanitation are saying that the investigation is complete, but in my opinion, it's not. The testimony of the drivers, I agree, is one, to protect them, but two, they hold a really critical piece of this entire scenario. And understanding what they say, whether that is written or in person, is incredibly important to this entire issue at hand. I did just want to state that. Whether, and I know your attorney is advising you now, but you mentioned too that there are notes and potentially even transcripts from interviews that you did directly. Is that something that you have copies of that you're able to share with the City of Los Angeles?
I'd have to talk to our attorney about that. I mean, there is some privacy rights that drivers and anybody who was interviewed has. And my attorney was reminding me that well, it could be more complicated because the Teamsters are involved, and the Teamsters were not keen on anybody else interviewing their guys. And so, I mean, if you put it all together, it's, I mean, I regret that it's causing you all such angst because, I mean, we really did drill down and get to the bottom of it. And the core question was, is this systemic and widespread? And all the evidence on our side, on our investigation and on the city's investigation, is it's not. And that was also part of the reason for the questioning, not just in the protection of the drivers. And drivers have been treated very fairly. They have no complaints. They're back on the job. But part of it was we needed to know if they were instructed to commingle, which was sort of motivated by the question of, is this systemic? So when we go back to the initial question, is it systemic and widespread, and then we show it's just not systemic and widespread, I mean, it's like, okay.
Do you have records of the interviews from the drivers that you're able to turn over?
Can I get back to you on that? I'm sure we have records.
Let me rephrase this in a different way. Is it the intent of Waste Manage to be as cooperative as possible in this investigation and to share any records that we'd like?
Well, it's our intent certainly to be cooperative. Any records that we'd like is pretty broad. So I
specific to what happened, specific to the drivers.
Yeah, that I need to talk to the people who did the investigation and find out where the lines are. Okay, I'm not really in a position to answer that. I'm not trying to be evasive, but I'm not the person to answer whether or not what the case specifically was recorded can be just turned over. I will be the person who goes back to the office and says, we need to get an answer to the board for this.
I have a question. I'm sorry if you stated this when you first started, but can you state again for the record your name and your position at Waste Management?
Doug Corcoran, and I'm a director with Waste Management.
Director of?
Well, my official title is Director of Post-Collection Operations, but I'm functioning as the director of our public sector group, which does all the municipal contracting.
And just in terms of Waste Management executives, in terms of the president or the CEO, is there a reason why they're not in front of us today to answer this if you're not the right person to be answering these questions?
Actually, I'm not sure they would be able to answer that just off the cuff either. I think we really need to just make sure what can be shared and what really shouldn't based on individual privacy rights.
Okay. Well, at the next hearing, it would, I think, at least from my perspective and what I heard from other of my colleagues, that we don't just want you to give us updates. Like, we want to see actual progress and understand why we can or can't understand the direct testimony of the drivers. We may go into how many hearings over this because I think so many of us are really concerned about the drivers' opinions. I think to Mr. Janov's point earlier, it's hard to trust the data when the data that you're giving us and that this investigation is based off of feels like it's been manipulated in a way to, show us what you want, because maybe there's a level of exposure there that you don't want us to see, but we're really not going to know that until we truly understand the full picture, and that involves the drivers themselves.
I would have to disagree with your characterization and thinking that we've manipulated anything, but I hear you. You want to hear from drivers, or you want to get closer to hearing from actual drivers. I hear that.
But is that not the video that we saw? We didn't see it today, but we saw it last January, that the testimony we heard back and forth again today, that drivers were in fact, picking up or not picking up the collection in order to have the trucks pick up a GPS point that is then used by LA Sanitation to ensure quality control. Is that not data manipulation?
Yeah, it's actually, some of the questions you're asking are answered in the report, but the drivers stated the bins were contaminated. I know Mr. Janovs has a different position on that, but that's what they said. And so it is possible within this system from a person who doesn't know the system, the program, for that person to think that drivers are commingling, because there is a process where the blue bin is allowed to be dumped in the trash truck. So a third party who is not familiar with the contract and not familiar with how it works will look at that. And I mean, really, what other conclusion would they come to? They're like, wait a minute, I just saw that truck dump a black bin and a blue bin.
With all due respect, sir, I think the investigation shows that you actually didn't follow the proper procedure to know that the bins were contaminated because you were dumping the trucks in the wrong trucks, or you were dumping the bins in the wrong truck before even opening them. And I'm just gonna move on and also give my colleagues other opportunities to ask you a question. But I want to know, did you at any point reach out to Mr. Janevs at all to talk to him directly about what happened? And specifically, I'd also like you to elaborate about the notice that he received in late December, notice of contamination that he also talked about a little bit, that also noted future contamination.
So I'd have to go back through the notes, but we do have record of our customer service rep reaching out. Our contract manager also attempted to talk to Mr. Janevs at his property. So yes, we have reached out to him.
Okay. I don't have any other questions for you right now. I have some questions for sanitation, Mr. Janevs directly, but I'll pause there and give others an opportunity to ask questions too.
Thank you. Well, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, President James. Obviously, I also have questions about the written statements and what the drivers. I was the one that was very concerned about if they got a direct directive for them to go do this from their manager. And as of right now, that's still not clear to me based on what you have here. But I think the route for us, or at least for me, would be to read those statements. I don't need to, I understand what you're doing is protecting your drivers from extra stress, and I understand that sanitation is not their direct supervisor, so that mingles that, but I do think that we have a right to at least see the written statements of what they actually wrote when you first interview them. That's very telling, and that can really tell us a lot. By you saying that this is not a systematic issue, because you didn't find that this was a systematic issue, we can kind of oversee the fact that we don't have written statements. That doesn't work. At least in my eyes, I don't understand how you can get from that to that. I'm glad that your investigations were concluded that this was not a systematic issue for your company. I'm very happy about that. But still, even if this was a one-time incident, this is the root of the issue. And so I do want to see the written statements. And I don't know what legal ramifications from our side or from your side that entails, and including the unions as well. But I think that's part of so that we are all clear here what you're doing. This is a very substantial, big contract. $100 million, I imagine, is important to your company, right?
Sure.
So I don't understand why there is a lack of transparency. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, we really don't see it as a lack of transparency. I'm going to take back the concerns, as honestly, I know folks asked. We felt that the core question had been dealt with, and when we took that and weighed in what the drivers had already been through, we just thought, you know what, enough's enough for these guys. They're sorry. They didn't, and the core question's been answered. There's no systemic commingling of recycling. I mean, almost nobody is saying it. I know Mr. Janevs thinks there is, based on his observations, but it's not borne out anywhere else. So it's not for an attempt to not be transparent. We just thought we answered all the questions that were really the critical questions. This is stuff I got to take back and say, look, we missed this one. The board feels very, very, very strongly about getting some additional information from the drivers, and we did not. I guess what I'd say is that I didn't adequately appreciate that after the last hearing, I thought it was the other stuff that was really the core issues. So, we'll
I
take
think
it back.
after today's hearing, you understand that we as commissioners do feel that way. We want to see that.
I hear you
moving
loud
in.
and clear now,
Okay.
for sure. I won't miss that one again.
Well, I'm going to move forward from the written statement situation. You did say that those employers are back at the job,
Yes,
doing the same thing,
yes,
at the same route.
yes. There is a union issue there with routes. They bid on the routes. You can't just pluck guys off the route. We have a contract with the Teamsters. And, I mean, honestly, they did say...
You can't request for the drivers, the guys on the floor, to be replaced somewhere else, at least at a different route?
No, that has to go through a process that's
You can't go through
determined
that
by the
process?
collective bargaining agreement.
I'm not asking for them to be terminated at all. That's going to be part of your procedure. But I would feel there would be some kind of inclination to change at least those drivers from that same route.
Yeah, it's just not that simple in a union contract. And
Well, there
moving
is a
people
$100
around
million
is-
contract on the table here. I would think management, just my inclination would tell me that that would be the right thing to do. But I'm going to move on from that one because there's also a violation notice given to our person on hand here that was dated after this whole situation on 12/26. By you telling me that these drivers are on the same route, working the same position, and then weeks later, the the property owner gets a violation.
Let me see that violation. I'm going to have to look at
Am I clear on my timeline?
see if it's the same.
Yes, okay. I just want to make sure.
Right. So I think that's January 2nd.
It states here 12/26/19. I have it in front of us.
12/26.
Is this the one, Mr. Janvis? There it is. He actually has the actual. So my question is, why really we gave him a violation of notice, given after everything we had gone through? Maybe this is something you need to investigate and you don't have the answer right now. But if you have an answer, can you tell us why?
Well, what the driver would have left that if he looked in the recycling bin and there was contamination in there.
And I don't know how the system works, and maybe sanitation has a better answer for me or you. But at that time, I see that you were already giving him 4 violations. How is that right?
Well, each time the driver goes to an account to service it, they observe the bin. If they see what they believe is contamination in the bin, they leave a tag for that episode. for that
And
service.
we're talking about the same drivers that got in trouble, right? Were the ones that administer this?
I think I'd have to go back to the timing on that, but at some point those drivers were on suspension pending an investigation after we saw the videos. So they were suspended. It may not have been the same driver. It would have been the same route. But
I
it
agree,
could have been
okay,
a different
agreed.
driver. Go ahead.
So my question again was, you're going to find out if it's the same drivers that got themselves in trouble, right?
Yeah, I'll find that out. But are you talking about 4 separate incidences or the 4 boxes checked on the one
There's
tag?
a 4 boxes check here, and according to this, it says 4 instance. So there is 4 different instances?
That's a training issue. So we talked to the driver about that, and he said, well, I thought I was supposed to mark a box for each type of contamination I saw. So he's like, 4 types. So maybe that's like garbage and food and construction waste and everything. And so that was one of the things we had to go back and train him about. I was saying, look, this is not, you're only supposed to check 1 box at a time. He thought that he had to check 4 boxes because he saw 4 different types of contamination in the
And he
recycling.
did it all in one day, according to this. It's
Yeah, but-
12/26, 1/2, and 1/8, all in one day?
He didn't write those dates in there.
Who wrote those dates? Was it, oh, you wrote those dates, okay. So can we just double check, because it would seem, I would seem that Mr., I keep on forgetting your name, Jen, yes, it has kind of a right to see why this is happening, especially if we're putting the same folks on the same route.
Right. Right. In that particular case, there was one incident. The driver filled out the form wrong. He didn't mean to say there were 4 different times.
So that's
that happened.
additional training you need to do to your drivers.
That's right. And that was part of the training. It was like, here's how you fill out the form, because we had at least one driver who didn't understand it.
And my last question to you is, just right now, you said that there are times that the blue bin can go into the same trash truck as the black bin, and maybe a third party would not know why that would happen. You just said that just not so long ago. Can you tell me in what case will that happen, or in what case do you think that's okay to happen?
Yeah, that's in the contract. If the bin is contaminated, then you can dump it as trash. What we do is we contact the customer, or we attempt to, gives the customer a chance to move the contamination out, and if that happens, then it gets dumped as recycling. But if it stays contaminated, it goes in the trash bin, and we just give the customer a notice. Now, what will happen from now on is immediately or very soon thereafter, our outreach people will reach out to that customer and say, look, here's what happened, here's why this happened, and in the future, the customer doesn't get penalized. It's just that it's contaminated, and therefore it's no longer considered recycling.
So before and now, right? So did that happen before?
That's been part of the contract since the beginning.
But that did not happen, right?
It's happened.
You said
since
somebody
the
will go
contract
out there and
began.
speak to the
Oh,
customer.
So there wasn't necessarily a event-driven visit before. There was a regular schedule of visiting customers, and they go through all the customers. But now we've added to that, if there's an event, you go out and do that, and then you get back on your regular schedule.
So you've changed that now?
We have.
And do you think that if we will be able to catch that now? From December to now, we're just in March.
It'll catch it going forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it may have caught it in some other instances too, since we put it in place, but it won't go all the way back to December.
Okay, I yield my time.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Davis, you wanted a point of clarification?
I do. I want a point of observation. When I asked you about the drivers and their electing not to participate, you said you didn't think it was a great idea. You said that you didn't think it was a great idea, and then when Commissioner Colosa asked you, you said it was the union. So it would have been helpful to have all of that information at once. I just want to put that on the record in terms of their involvement, whether they elected to or not to. I'm just wanting to make that point to you about that.
Well, President Pro Tem, our attorney Jonathan Weiss is available if you want him to speak to that issue right now.
No, I wanted you to speak to that issue as the administrator, as the person who was investigating. Is that correct? Is that what you did? I will talk to the attorney as well, but is it true that you were the person who conducted the investigation for your...
I did not. No.
What did you do?
I received the report. We wanted to keep...
Oh, I see.
We wanted to have a independent
You presented,
committee.
Okay, bottom line, and I'm not going to take up the time for the rest of the board, but you presented here, I asked the question, you stated that you didn't want them to do it, and that's okay, but that you didn't tell me, and that was the time to tell us, or me at least, that the Teamsters' involvement also was a reason for their not participating. So, that was important to know.
That was an oversight on my part, not to mention that when I was speaking to you. I apologize for that.
I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but
no,
that's important in the work that we're doing here today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Commissioner Villegas.
Just have very few comments. But for clarification, President James, are we going to be tabling this again? Are we going to be, not necessarily tabling it, are we going to be hearing this item again?
Yes, one of the things I was going to get to, I feel like, and I'll put as brief a substantive answer to that in my opinion as I can.
I still have just
That's
one
fine.
more comment.
But given what Mr. Janos has told us about the additional videos that he has, one of the things when I call sanitation back up to wrap up today's hearing is to let them know that I want those videos reviewed by sanitation. Waste Management also has referenced that. I think they ought to have the opportunity to respond as well. And there are some issues that even with the additional, and there's another issue I'm going to put on the table as well regarding costs, but there's the additional work that's being done on this. I was hoping that we would be able to wrap this up today with the indication about additional videos that haven't yet been reviewed. We're not going to be able to wrap this up at today's hearing. So it will continue over to another date.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to let you know, as the fifth commissioner on the board for Public Works, I just wrote down some notes, but all the questions have already been asked for my part. I do want you to take this back, though, and maybe you're not the appropriate person to come and present to us, because or maybe it's your attorney that can come back and present to us, or maybe it's your president that can come back and present to us, because the tone that you take, just keep this in mind. Is just as it is just as important for us to be at our full game as it is for you to be at your full game. Okay, that is something that I've noticed through this process. I've noticed that the $1,000 appeal that you have, you are not sending the right message. Again, you can take this back to your organization. You're not sending the right message to us, to our sanitation, that you feel that you are in a conciliatory or in a partnership with us. Okay, I feel that the other word that I wrote here is retaliation. That is very common in either government or in the private sector, and in this case, maybe in the gentleman who was able to film, this incident from taking place, and also got some news coverage. You can take that back to your organization as well as for optics purposes. If you guys can possibly review something like that, and you may not even think that it's important, but I'm raising it because for us, it's really important, and that's what it looks like. I have on here also just your tone for which you're doing your presentation, and for it's very condescending for us to be able to receive this, and you feel that we do not know your business. Okay, and perhaps you can take that back to your organization as well, or maybe have somebody else that can walk us through your line of business, but the tone that you're delivering this is not very welcoming. And that is my end of my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Villegas. So, Mr. Myers, one moment. Commissioner Garcia?
I just have one thing. I just want you to reconsider the blue bin contamination notice that was given on 12/26 to the property owner. Please look into that. I think he needs some clarification around that.
And that was it, Commissioner Garcia. Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Mr. Myers?
Thank you.
Couple of issues. Could you estimate for me how much time, value of city resources have had to be placed on this as a result of the conduct of Waste Management that was revealed in the news story?
Substantially north of 200 to 300 hours. I got 100 hours just of inspection time at just the Acama address. The other of following trucks around to try to verify if everybody else is doing, everything that they're supposed to. I said north of 200 hours, 300 hours, easy.
I don't know if the contract does or does not have express language. I'm assuming it does not, regarding reimbursement for costs like this caused by the misconduct which has been established. I mean, in the last hearing, it was established that it was intentional. So assuming that the contract doesn't have express language reimbursing the city for costs that we've had to incur, I would be interested in whether or not the contract has language that is more broad, where it could be interpreted that such costs would have to be reimbursed to the city. Just a question on the table for our city attorney's office as we go forward with this process, since we'll be having another hearing. And that's all I have, other than do we want to schedule the date for another hearing? Commissioner Caloza.
Thank you, President James. I just wanted to add one additional note for the next hearing that we didn't have a chance to talk about, since we really dug deep on a few issues today. But from the board report, it stated that there were actually 11 instances that Mr. Janov, I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly, documented, and there's actually only 5 instances in which we've brought forth a fee to Waste Management for violating the contract. I would like to understand and know what the discrepancy is from the 5 and the 11 that was documented in the board report.
Oh, and I'm sorry, and to add on to your point, one of the things I wanted to ask is I told you a minute ago, Dan, we want sanitation to review all of the video. I think I may have already said that. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead and answer her question.
So to be clear, the 11 service requests that was referenced were for all of Waste Management. So there's 2 different items. What we did is we looked at all of the service requests. So it wasn't just at the 11168 Acama Street. There were 11 altogether, of which the Acama Street was a service request also. But there's also not a definitive correlation between we have to have a service request in order to assess the liquidated damage. In the case when it was brought to our attention that there was commingling, we relied on the evidence of the videos and not necessarily service requests to assess those liquidated damages. So that is across all of Waste Management's zones over the time period discussed.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I will just add one point that I did bring up in January's hearing, and that Mr. Janov was not given notice, at least from what I understood at that meeting, that we were actually having that hearing, that first hearing in January. I know he's here today, and I thank him for his testimony. I'm so glad that he's here to share additional information. I was disappointed to hear that he was only reached out to recently and interviewed only recently, when I had made that specific request back in January. I don't want us to keep going back and forth asking you to do a more thorough investigation of things that we had asked for initially, and really want to make sure that, I just want to put an exclamation point on that piece, that he receives also a copy of the report that you may be presenting before us, in case there's anything additional that may be missing that should also be noted.
Certainly be happy to find that report, and per the board's request, we'll be reviewing all the videos also that will be provided.
Thank you. No other lights are on. So this oral report will be received. Do we want to schedule a tentative update? My recommendation, colleagues, would be to do so, but it's more your, and the reason I would, is, Mr. Nye, do we have April 30th as an available, what day of the week is that?
April 30th, 2020 is a Thursday.
How about the next day, which would be, is that May 1?
May 1st, 2020.
How about Friday, May 1st? Only because Mr. Corcoran mentioned that he could have some, a substantive update on the camera issue as well on the trucks. He didn't commit that was a definite date, but it was a date worthy of an update. So with a goal of the May 1st. So that'll be the scheduling of the follow-up hearing on this item as we work to finally get resolution. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Yes, Mr. Knight, we have cleared the desk. One thing I will ask, Mr. Janos, are you available on May 1st? We asked real parties and interest that question. Same with you as well, sir. Okay. John?
I could just address the board very briefly. As you know, I'm the outside counsel for waste management.
Just your name for the record as
Jonathan Weiss, for the record. I wanted just to say that Commissioner Caloza, Dr. Davis, and Commissioner Garcia, you asked very important questions that deserve answers. I believe you received the best possible answers that you could get, given the constraints that Mr. Corcoran is under. But as legal counsel, I want to elaborate and clarify for you and address those concerns because I think they're very important. I understand that you're the oversight body for the Department of Public Works. You have a solemn responsibility to make sure that all of the contracts that have been publicly bid on and awarded are administered properly and consistently with the spirit of those RFPs, and that everything is done in the interest of the public because you serve the public. And so I just wanted to register that fact. It's very important. So there are, unfortunately, as is often the case with these situations, thorny legal implications. There's one of the goals of the franchise agreements is that there be strong protections for labor. So there's a collective bargaining agreement with Waste Management. The employees are unionized, they're Teamsters, and so there are legal rights that the employees have as union workers that the case law in California recognizes and we have to respect. There are legal rights that they have, privacy rights with respect to their employment and their personnel issues. Consistent with our obligations to recognize and appreciate those rights, we do feel that it's very important that there be transparency in these proceedings. And in fact, we just heard a long discussion about the requirement under the Brown Act to properly agendize because matters of public importance need to be addressed publicly. So with respect to your question about hearing from the drivers, I want to commit to you today in public that I personally will do everything I can to navigate the legal issues so that we can get, as Dr. Davis suggested, sworn statements from the drivers that address these issues. It's going to take some work, and there's a lot of moving parts, but I wanted to make that clear to you today.
Thank you. I'm sorry? There we go. Thank you. Commissioner Villegas is already satisfied with her request. Progress is on the way. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Mr. Knight, have we cleared the desk?
Yes, we have.
Okay, then the report is received. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice Wednesday. What's left?